Did the old lady die? That's what the man asked, but it made me really mad. He was my ex-husband who left his blind mom to be with his new girlfriend. It's crazy to think he came from my kind mother-in-law. His words made me so angry. You must have had it tough too, right? Now you can do whatever you want, but I guess there's only so much an old lady like you can do. He laughed loudly and rudely, making it hard to show how mad I was. I just smiled back at him. Well, I actually just inherited $3 million, so I'm going to enjoy my freedom, I said, wiping the smirk off my ex-husband's face. He never thought he'd end up needing my forgiveness someday. My name is Grace, and I'm 63 years old now. I got married when I was young and moved in with my in-laws. They were kind people, but unfortunately, my husband turned out to be a big letdown. I divorced him when I was 53. At that time, our daughter Mary was 18, and our son Jack was 15. It was a tough time because we had to pay for their education, and I also had to take care of my blind mother-in-law. I met my ex-husband John at work. I was 18 when I joined the company, and he was 24, already a senior there. He seemed reliable and caring, which I admired. Despite being popular, he liked me and asked me out. When we decided to get married, I met his parents. His dad had trouble moving around, and his mom couldn't see. I was touched to see John taking care of them while working. Even though my parents were worried about my future, seeing how much John cared for his parents made me ignore their concerns and marry him. My parents were upset and cut ties with me, but I was confident in my decision. Being young, I wasn't scared of anything. After getting married, I decided to quit my job so I could take care of my in-laws and manage our household. My husband, John, was grateful for this arrangement as it allowed him to focus on his work. My in-laws treated me like their own daughter and always showed appreciation for what I did. Even though taking care of them was challenging, their kindness made it easier to bear. John worked late every day, so I believed everything was going smoothly at home. One day, while at the grocery store, I bumped into one of John's former colleagues. We chatted about John and me, and the colleague mentioned how John always left work early because he was worried about me, which made him a great husband. I was puzzled because John usually came home late, not early. I thought it must have been a misunderstanding, so I just smiled awkwardly and agreed. When I got home, I brought it up with John, intending to subtly address the issue. But before I could finish, John got defensive and yelled at me, saying he was working hard and not just goofing off. He brushed off my concerns about his father needing more care, showing no willingness to help. This made me feel unsupported and frustrated by his reaction. I had a feeling something wasn't right, but I was too scared to confront my husband about it. I had gone against my parents' wishes to marry him, so I didn't have a backup plan if things went wrong. Plus, I was worried about my in-laws. So I just kept living each day as usual. Then, I had an idea to buy an electric wheelchair for my father-in-law. He was managing with a cane and a manual wheelchair, but with an electric one. He could move around more easily. And if I put my blind mother-in-law in the wheelchair and pushed her, we could go for walks farther from home. When I brought it up with my husband, I expected him to agree, but he wasn't too keen. He said we couldn't afford it with his income being tight. While it was true that we weren't wealthy, I felt the wheelchair would bring joy to my in-laws, so I suggested borrowing money from the bank and repaying it later with their pension. My husband reluctantly agreed, warning me not to cause trouble. I couldn't tell my in-laws exactly what he said. But when I mentioned we could borrow from the bank, my father-in-law was thrilled. So we went to the bank together, got a loan, and bought the wheelchair. My in-laws were overjoyed with their new mobility aid. Not long after, my father-in-law passed away, leaving me and my mother-in-law deeply saddened. But instead of offering comfort, John complained about the debt from buying the wheelchair. His words made me feel guilty, especially knowing my mother-in-law likely overheard. Now, it was just me and her at home. With her blindness, she could handle some things on her own, reducing my caregiving duties significantly. Around this time, John suggested we have children. I was unsure about his intentions, but I hoped it meant a positive change. We ended up having 2 children, but unfortunately, John didn't become more involved with household tasks even after they were born. My days were a whirlwind of chores and childcare. Despite it all, seeing my mother-in-law happy brought me comfort, especially when she heard the laughter of our children. After my father-in-law's death, we managed to find some happiness, but there were signs our marriage was struggling. John seemed distant, always late coming home, and showing little affection for my mother-in-law or the kids. He even started working on his days off, with no joy on his face. I began to accept that as long as he provided financially, maybe that was enough. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but our children grew up to be good-hearted and honest. Our family faced a big change when our daughter turned 18 and was heading off to college. On a Saturday, which was supposed to be a day off for John, he announced he was going to work. I had to remind him that he promised to take my mother-in-law to the hospital for her checkup. This was something we had planned for a few days, and it was also the day our daughter was moving into her college dorm. But John snapped at me, saying it was my job as a housewife to take care of such things. He claimed he needed to help our daughter set up for college. This outburst surprised me, and I couldn't believe he was being so insensitive. I'd never talked back to him before, but his attitude made me furious. He seemed taken aback by my reaction and continued to argue, saying hurtful things about why he married me in the first place. His words stung, and I felt regret for ever marrying him. I couldn't bear his insults anymore, so I simply told him to stop. I realized I couldn't expect anything from him anymore. He seemed satisfied that I didn't argue back and left, saying I should take care of my mother-in-law and the kids. After that, he never came back home again. It was a painful realization that our marriage was falling apart. In the end, I had my eldest daughter take care of her dorm move-in while I accompanied my mother-in-law to her health checkup. Despite the absence of my husband, we managed to get through the day. Everyone noticed he didn't come back, but nobody spoke about it. A few days later, a letter arrived from him, containing a divorce notice and a message stating he was leaving to live with his lover. He also mentioned he didn't want to be involved in the debts left by my in-laws and that we could live our lives as we pleased. I felt exhausted and realized I would be happier without him. Before filing for divorce, I informed my children and my mother-in-law about the situation. My mother-in-law was deeply shocked and apologized repeatedly while crying. She expressed her intention to move out, feeling like a stranger now that we were getting divorced. But I reassured her, saying she was just like my real mother and the only grandmother my children knew. I insisted that we were still a family and didn't need to worry about our future. Despite her tears, she thanked me for my words. However, I couldn't deny my worries. Even though my husband wasn't perfect, his financial contribution was still valuable. Now that he was gone, I felt uncertain about our future. I desperately searched for a job, but nobody would hire me because I had been a housewife for many years. Both Mary and Jack offered to work, but I felt like I had to find a way to support us. However, my mother-in-law surprised us by telling me not to worry about working and to focus on going back to school if I wanted. She assured me that she would take care of everything. We were puzzled by her offer, but she insisted, and our lives continued without any major changes. If anything, it felt like we could live more comfortably than when my husband was around. I decided to file for divorce with the help of a lawyer. My mother-in-law wanted to report him missing, but I had no desire to see him again. Surely she must want to see her son, my ex-husband, I thought. But even after she reported him missing, my ex-husband was never found. About 2 years ago, my mother-in-law passed away to join my father-in-law. Sadly, she never got to reunite with my ex-husband during her lifetime, even though he's her son. I felt like I should contact him, but when I tried to find his address, there was nobody living there. Reluctantly, we held a small funeral for my mother-in-law with just the three of us. And now, unexpectedly, my ex-husband stands before me. I saw him while I was out shopping alone. At first, I thought I had mistaken him for someone else and tried to ignore him, but he kept staring at me. It's probably not a mistake, I thought, deciding to ignore him, but he persisted, saying, "Grace, right? You're as glum as ever. How rude." The woman next to him laughed softly, adding to my irritation. Just as I was about to walk past them, he said, "Did the poor old hag already kick the bucket?" I stopped in my tracks, glaring at my ex-husband. "Who are you calling a poor old hag?" I asked sharply. He smirked and replied, "You know who I mean, right? Your blind mother-in-law. Heard she passed away. Must have been tough for you, but hey, now you're free to do whatever." Well, within limits, I guess. His crude laughter grated on my nerves, but I knew showing anger would only give him satisfaction, so I forced a smile and replied, "Actually, I inherited $3 million, so I don't have to work anymore. I'm enjoying my freedom, thanks." The smirk on his face disappeared at my unexpected response. "See ya," I said, turning to leave. But he seemed stunned, calling out to me hurriedly, Wait a minute. An inheritance of $3 million. What are you talking about? He asked incredulously. What am I talking about? I mean exactly what I said. Thanks to your disappearance, I was able to inherit smoothly without you in the picture. I replied with a hint of satisfaction. My ex-husband's face went pale. You're kidding me. I'm her son, right? I didn't hear about any inheritance. I should have a right to get a share too, he insisted. I couldn't help but smirk. Well, technically yes, but you were gone. Did you know that after 7 years of disappearance you are considered legally dead? I said, enjoying the turn of events. What? So your mother-in-law's inheritance was willed to me, your eldest son, and eldest daughter. You have no role in this anymore, I asserted confidently. My ex-husband looked utterly bewildered, and I had to resist the urge to burst out laughing. I now understood why my mother-in-law had urged me to file a missing persons report after she passed away. A lawyer representing her estate appeared and explained everything to me. It turned out that my mother-in-law's family were landowners, but she had cut ties with them, much like I had with my own family. However, she still had the right to inherit. When her parents passed away, she inherited without telling anyone. Thanks to this unexpected windfall, we were able to live without financial worries. I once asked my mother-in-law, Mrs. Young, how are you managing your money? If it's a pension or something like that, please use it however you like. Her response was simple yet profound. I'm using it as I please to live a happy life with my family. And that's exactly what we did. I knew the money my mother-in-law had wasn't from a pension, judging by how freely she spent it. But it was definitely hers. Even though we were struggling financially, we decided to accept her generosity gratefully. Her inheritance was far more than she could ever spend in her lifetime. The only problem was my husband's presence. If something were to happen to her, he would inherit everything. But she didn't want that. During a consultation with a lawyer, my husband vanished. She thought he had finally cut ties with us. While she was sad to leave us, she planned to move into a nursing home with assisted living and use up most of her inheritance so she wouldn't leave any problems behind. However, my eldest son, eldest daughter, and I all expressed that we saw her as family and wanted to continue living together. This brought her immense happiness. Wanting to pass on her inheritance to us, she followed her attorney's advice and filed a missing person report for my husband. Following the law, my husband left home, and after 7 years, he was legally treated as if he had passed away. 1 year later, when my mother-in-law passed away, her inheritance was passed on to her oldest son and daughter. Even though I didn't have a right to inherit in place of my husband, my mother-in-law made sure to include me in her will. Thanks to her love and foresight, we were able to receive her generous legacy. Because of her, your mom paid for all of Jack's and Mary's school fees and living costs. That's why we could live happily. I thanked my ex-husband for leaving. When I said this to my ex-husband, he looked really surprised with his mouth wide open. He deserved it. Later, my ex-husband contacted me, saying he should get some of the money from the inheritance. I couldn't believe how mean he was after all these years, but legally, there's no inheritance for someone who's officially declared dead. I've told him this many times, but he still wants to argue about it. I spoke with a lawyer about my ex-husband's request to inherit. The lawyer explained that to inherit anything, my ex-husband would need to go through several legal steps, like canceling the missing person report. Usually in cases like ours, grandchildren end up inheriting the estate. We had no plans to give my ex-husband any money. I told him exactly what the lawyer said. If he wanted to inherit, he'd have to pay inheritance tax too. When I mentioned all these procedures to him, he went quiet. Our kids were there too, and we talked it over. I can't take time off work. I can't deal with all these legal steps, and I shouldn't have to pay inheritance tax. You guys should just give me my share. I helped you all out, so you owe me this much. My ex-husband argued. I was really upset by his stubbornness. It turns out he's just working day-to-day jobs now and can't even afford to take a day off. The company he worked for when we were married let him go because he was always absent. When I asked why he left his job and why he's struggling financially, he admitted he owed money to an old flame. He's been doing odd jobs and moving around a lot to pay off his debt. I get it, he insisted, but even with his explanation, I couldn't make sense of it. So things didn't work out with that other woman, huh? Then who was the woman you were with the other day? I asked. She's the one I've been searching for, my ex-husband mumbled quietly. When I heard this, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. My oldest son, my eldest daughter, and I were stunned into silence. Shaking my head at his foolishness, I told my ex-husband, "You're not young anymore. Stop acting like it." "She's my true love," he insisted. When he said that, I realized trying to reason with him was pointless. After reconnecting with my ex-husband, I discovered where he lives now. Turns out, he's staying in an apartment in the nearby town, but it's in his girlfriend's name. My oldest son ended up buying the entire building and became the landlord. "We have the money Grandma gave us. It didn't make sense to leave it sitting there," my son explained. Investing in real estate seemed like a better idea. Initially, I thought he wanted to assist his father, but that wasn't the case at all. Instead, if the rent is even slightly late, he's quick to demand it. The previous landlord might have been lenient, but my son doesn't operate like that. "You've caused your mother more than enough trouble. You selfishly picked this path, so you should face even more hardship than she did," my eldest son declared. It seemed like my son's way of penalizing his father, who had never been much of a dad. The kids surely had their own opinions about it. Perhaps that's why he couldn't handle this situation anymore. My ex-husband came to our house, pleading for forgiveness. "I'm truly sorry. I neglected my duties as a parent and a partner, Grace. I was wrong," he admitted. I couldn't help but let out a sigh as I watched my ex-husband's desperation. But I also had my own life to focus on. "Can't you talk to Jack and ask him to give me a break on the rent? He looked so upset when he asked," my ex-husband pleaded. "If you had been a better father to our kids, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation, failing as a son, a husband, and a father. What do you have left in your life now? What was it all for?" "You need to seriously think about that," I responded. My words left my ex-husband speechless, and he walked away without saying anything. He looked so small as he left. Eventually, my ex-husband got kicked out of his apartment because he couldn't pay the rent. His new place seems to be in an old building where it's chilly and drafty. He's still living day to day, taking whatever jobs he can find. On the day we reconnected, he apparently ended things with the woman he was living with when he left our apartment. It seems he was covering her living expenses even after he got kicked out for not paying rent. I suppose it couldn't be helped. Instead, he should probably be grateful that his girlfriend stayed with him for as long as she did. She was young and maybe didn't see his true colors, much like I did when we were together. As for us, we're doing really well now. Thanks to my mother-in-law's money, as my oldest son suggested, we invested in real estate and stocks, so we have a steady income without having to work too hard. We even have time for fun things like traveling every month. Plus, my eldest daughter, Mary, is getting married. Her fiancé is wonderful and treats her wonderfully. Our family and happiness are growing. I'm savoring the joy of today, which we achieved by overcoming our past struggles.
My son Matthew finally got married. And now, I hear there's a baby on the way. Matthew, who I used to worry so much about, is married. And now, I'm going to see the face of my grandchild, too. My husband Jason brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. But then it happened. As I was eagerly anticipating the arrival of my first grandchild, my daughter-in-law Carol hit me with some shocking words. "A dirty grandma who's a cleaning lady is a bad influence on our child, so we're cutting you off." A year has passed since we've been estranged. Now, Matthew says he's bringing his family to visit us. He's made up his mind. My name is Lisa Wilson, and I'm 72 years old. Until 2 years ago, I worked as a certified architect, but I retired when I turned 70. Now, I live a leisurely life in an upscale apartment in Manhattan, New York City, with my husband Jason, who's the same age as me. Jason was a skilled carpenter, but he retired at 65. When I was still working, he took cooking classes so he could prepare meals for me. Now, he's even better at cooking than I am. Jason spends his free time building plastic model kits, a hobby of his, and taking walks to stay healthy. As for me, I thought I would take it easy after retirement, but maybe because I've always been a bit of a workaholic, I couldn't sit still at home. So, a year ago, I signed up with a temp agency and started working as a cleaning lady in the city. Sometimes, I even come across buildings I was involved in designing, and I feel a deep affection for them, like they're my own children. I enjoy this job because it keeps me active and healthy. At work, I keep it a secret that I was once a certified architect earning $500,000 a year and that I now live in a high-end apartment. People's jealousy can be a hassle. So it's easier for them to think of me as an old woman who has to work even after turning 70. The only thing that bothers me is my 40-year-old son, Matthew. He works for a sporting goods company in the city. He's loved sports since he was a kid, played baseball in college as a shortstop, and still enjoys watching sports of all kinds. His job in sales at the sporting goods company suits him well. Matthew is single. He was supposed to get married 5 years ago, but he was deeply betrayed by his fiancée. To put it simply, the woman was only after his money. According to my son, her attitude changed after she found out he lived in a high-end apartment with his parents. She started spending money recklessly, asking about my and Jason's health, and the final straw was when Matthew overheard her talking to a man he didn't know about how they could live it up once the inheritance came through, since his parents were getting on in years. It was a messy breakup, but he managed to cut ties with her. "I can't marry someone who's just waiting for mom and dad to die." He said this with a wry smile, but I know the emotional damage he suffered was significant. Not long after that, Matthew moved out of the high-rise apartment and started living alone in a studio apartment. It was painful for Jason and me to think that the high-rise apartment had become a trauma for Matthew. 5 years have passed since then. We hadn't heard anything about marriage or even about him dating anyone. Marriage isn't everything, and as long as he's happy, that's all that matters. But I hoped he would find a partner he could spend his life with. We bought the high-rise apartment about 10 years ago. Before that, we lived in a detached house in a neighboring city of New York. It was a house left to us by Jason's parents, and it was comfortable, but as we got older, going up and down the stairs between the first and second floors became more challenging. One day, "Why don't we sell this house and spend our retirement in the city? I've always wanted to live in one of those high-rise apartments that are getting so much attention lately. They're convenient, and the security is good too," Jason suddenly said. Even though I had never designed a high-rise apartment myself, I was very interested. Living in the heart of New York would allow us to easily visit places like movie theaters and art museums, so I wouldn't have to worry about being bored after retirement. I also agreed with Jason's opinion, laughing as he said, "If we just sit around the house after retirement, we might get senile." So, we sold the house where we had lived for so many years and moved to a high-rise apartment in Manhattan, New York. As expected, the apartment was very comfortable, with a wide variety of commercial facilities and clinics on the lower floors, making it convenient to take care of most things without even leaving the building. We chose the apartment carefully, so its asset value is unlikely to decrease significantly. We even considered the possibility of selling it one day and moving to a retirement home together. Matthew visits us at least once a month, and we have dinner together. One day, when he came over, "Dad, Mom, the woman I've been seeing is pregnant, so we're getting married," he said. Jason and I were both shocked at first, but then we were overjoyed. Matthew, who had been a source of worry for us, was getting married. And on top of that, we would get to see the face of our grandchild. Jason brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. The woman he was marrying was Carol, a 35-year-old. They met when they were seated next to each other at a baseball game. They were cheering for the same team, and after an intense seesaw game, their team won with a walk-off home run in the final inning. That's when they decided to celebrate together. "It's great to have a shared hobby that you both enjoy," I said. At that moment, I imagined Matthew, wearing a baseball cap, taking his child to a game with Carol, the three of them enjoying the day together as a family. The thought filled me with happiness. Then Matthew said, "So, there's something I'd like to ask. Could you keep it a secret that you and Dad live in a high-rise apartment for a while?" It's not that I don't trust her. It was clear that his previous experience had left him deeply scarred. Of course, if that's what you want. It's not like we have to keep it a secret forever. I reassured him. Yeah, thanks. Once the baby is born, I'll be able to bring them here. The thought of that filled me with genuine anticipation. Matthew and Carol discussed it between themselves, and given their ages, they decided not to have a wedding. Instead, they would just take some photos and throw a party. Matthew told us that there wouldn't be a formal meeting between the two families and that greetings could be exchanged at the party itself. It seems that more couples are opting for this relaxed approach to marriage these days. It made sense to me. Why spend a lot of money on a wedding when there will be plenty of expenses once the baby arrives? It seemed like a practical decision. When I finally met Matthew's wife, the woman he introduced at the party, she struck me as a strong-willed and straightforward person. Since Matthew is more laid-back and a bit timid, I thought it might be good for him to have a partner who was more assertive. Carol's parents were also relatively young, both under 60, and still working. What caught my attention, though, was when Carol asked, "So, Jason and Lisa don't work anymore?" I replied, "Jason doesn't, but I work part-time as a building cleaner." Her expression changed as she repeated, "A cleaner?" It was as if she looked down on the job. Matthew and Carol began living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, close to Carol's parents. She said she feels safer being near her family while she's pregnant. "My commute has gotten a bit tougher, though," Matthew said, already giving off the vibe of someone under her control. "Well, a household runs smoothly when the husband is a bit under the wife's thumb," Jason remarked. "Oh really? And when exactly have I ever controlled you?" I shot back, teasingly. "Well, it's in moments like this, Lisa," Jason replied with a laugh. We all laughed along, but over time, that laughter began to fade. The next time Matthew came to visit our high-rise apartment, I noticed he looked noticeably gaunt. "She's been having a tough time with morning sickness and spends most of the day lying down. I've been taking care of all the housework. Not that I mind, but," he said with a wry smile. When times are tough, it's normal for couples to support each other. But morning sickness usually subsides by the 7th month, right? She should be in the stable period by now, and typically, the nausea eases off. Yeah, but she says she feels really weak and looks like she's not feeling well. Everyone's different, so I can't say for sure, but if she doesn't move around at all, it might make the delivery harder. Maybe you should consult a doctor. I couldn't help but offer some advice, driven by my strong desire for the safe birth of my grandchild. A while later, when I contacted Matthew again, it seemed my advice hadn't been taken. He told me that Carol might need to be hospitalized due to preeclampsia. Worried, I rushed to their apartment. Carol had noticeably gained weight. Probably over 40 pounds. "Carol, you've gained too much weight. Preeclampsia is serious. Even now, you should change your lifestyle, pay attention to your diet, and start doing some gentle exercise." I said this out of genuine concern, but it seemed to hit a nerve with Carol. "What are you saying all of a sudden? I need extra nutrients for the baby, and it's normal to gain some weight," she snapped back at me. "That idea of eating for two is outdated. Nowadays, the common advice is to eat a balanced diet and avoid excessive weight gain." Matthew, caught in the middle, looked flustered, not sure whose side to take. Carol, you'll be 36 by the time the baby is born, right? That counts as a high-risk pregnancy. You have to be much more careful than younger mothers. Maybe I had said too much. Why do you keep saying things that make me anxious? Just go home. She practically kicked me out. Matthew walked me out of the apartment, and I apologized. I'm sorry if I went too far. But I'm really worried. I know, Mom. I'll smooth things over, so please, you and Dad don't worry. Matthew reassured me, but a few weeks later, Carol ended up being hospitalized due to preeclampsia. I considered visiting her, but Matthew advised against it. She's really irritable because the hospital food is terrible, he said. Of course, a low-sodium diet wouldn't be appetizing. But that's the consequence of eating whatever she wanted and being inactive. All I could do was pray that everything would turn out okay and that I would get to meet my grandchild. Perhaps those prayers were answered because, after about 10 days, Carol was discharged from the hospital. She seemed to be taking better care of herself, and eventually, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Matthew told us the news, Jason and I clasped hands and rejoiced. We rushed to the hospital to meet our grandson. Thank you for letting us meet him. You did a great job, I said, trying to express my gratitude to Carol. But she replied, I didn't have him for you and Jason. There's a common saying that daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws don't get along, but I never thought that would apply to me. However, to my daughter-in-law, I might have just seemed like a nagging mother-in-law. I felt disappointed and disheartened. Still, when I heard from Matthew that Carol and my grandson had been discharged from the hospital, Jason and I brought a gift and visited their apartment. When I saw my newborn grandson, he was so tiny and incredibly adorable. It brought back memories of when Matthew was born, and I couldn't hold back my tears. As I gently reached out to touch my grandson's hand. Hey! Don't touch him with those dirty hands! Carol suddenly yelled at me. She must have seen me washing my hands thoroughly in the bathroom when we arrived. Come on, there's no need to speak like that, Matthew said, reprimanding her. Whose side are you on? She snapped back. It's not about taking sides. Dad, Mom, Carol, and our newborn baby, we're all important family. Matthew tried to reason. Excuse me? What are you talking about? Of course, your wife and your child are the most important. They started arguing intensely right in front of us. All right, both of you, calm down. I tried to intervene, but Carol, now furious, lashed out at me. Shut up! Whose fault do you think this is? It was shocking to hear such harsh words directed at us, her in-laws. She continued, her voice rising. A dirty cleaning lady grandma is a bad influence on my child, so we're cutting ties. Carol screamed hysterically. I was so stunned by her words that I fell silent. You're right. Seeing this isn't good for your grandchild. Jason sighed deeply and said, Yes, that's true. Carol, is that all you wanted to say? Carol didn't respond. I still deeply hurt. Jason and I left Matthew and Carol's apartment with heavy hearts. After discussing it, Jason and I decided to stay away from Matthew and his wife for a while. As more time passed, I hoped that things might eventually improve. In the meantime, I found comfort in the photos of my grandson that Matthew sent through WhatsApp. He had started crawling, and recently, he even managed to stand up while holding onto something. He was irresistibly adorable. The cuter he looked in those photos, the more I longed to hold him in my arms, which was tough to bear. What concerned me, though, was that all the photos Matthew sent were of the baby alone. Normally, Wouldn't parents take turns holding the baby in photos? Jason and I began to worry that their marriage might not be going well. As our grandson's first birthday approached, Matthew reached out to us. He said that the three of them would be coming over on Sunday. "Did you tell Carol about the high-rise apartment?" I asked. "They wouldn't be visiting unless she knew." "Yeah, I told her about the apartment, and also that you were a former licensed architect and made quite a lot of money. But she didn't believe me, so we're coming over to show her." It didn't seem like they were coming because their marriage was going well, or because Carol's attitude had softened, or because they thought they could get along better with us as grandparents. Matthew must have his own reasons. Though I had questions, I decided to wait and see what Sunday would bring. "Wow! No way! It's true!" Carol exclaimed as soon as she stepped inside the apartment, her voice filled with excitement. She had gained even more weight since the last time we saw her. "Oh my gosh! This is amazing! It's so spacious! How many rooms are there? And the view is incredible! It's the 30th floor, right? Fantastic!" Without even greeting Jason or me, Carol started exploring the apartment on her own. Meanwhile, Jason and I were completely absorbed in taking turns holding our grandson. Just watching him sleep peacefully brought a smile to our faces. But then, he woke up and started crying. Maybe the unfamiliar surroundings startled him, or perhaps he was hungry. "Carol, the baby's crying. Do you think he needs milk?" However, Carol didn't seem to hear the baby's cries at all. There. Don't cry, don't cry. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Carol said to Matthew, in a tone more affectionate than I'd ever heard from her before. "Lisa, you shouldn't have lied about being a cleaning lady. You were actually making a lot of money, right? You were a licensed architect or something?" She even began to act all sweet towards me, leaning in with a smile. "I really did work as a cleaning lady," I replied. "Wow, that's unusual. If I had that kind of money and lived in a place like this, I'd spend every day living it up." It was as if she was openly declaring herself a lazy person. Carol, getting carried away, said something fatal. "When Jason and Lisa die, this high-rise apartment will become ours, right?" "No, it won't." "What?" Carol asked, surprised by Matthew's cold reply. "I'm going to divorce you. I'll get custody of the child." "What are you talking about all of a sudden? Stop making bad jokes." "This isn't a joke. I've tolerated you neglecting housework and childcare." "That's right. You should be grateful that I gave birth to your child, especially since you're a dull man in your 40s. She wasn't exactly young herself, so what she said was completely nonsensical. "But I can't live with someone who looks forward to my parents' death. I never..." "Do you know why I didn't tell you about the high-rise apartment or my mom's job?" "What?" "And do you know why I brought you here today?" Matthew's voice was heavy with sadness. "What are you saying? This child is mine. There's no way I'm giving up custody." "Okay, I understand. Then I'll pay child support, but please divorce me." "Are you saying I should become a single mother and live in an apartment?" "No way. We don't need to get divorced. We can just all live together in this high-rise apartment." This exchange made it clear that she wanted the apartment more than custody of the child. Matthew likely brought Carol here to give her one last chance. For the sake of the child, it would be best if they didn't divorce. If Carol had shown even a bit of consideration towards us, his parents, Matthew might not have thought about divorce. But once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. Once Matthew made up his mind, He remained firm, even when Carol tried every trick in the book to sway him with tears. Finally, Matthew said to the still unyielding Carol, "I have video evidence of you not doing any housework or childcare, and I've recorded your words and actions since we arrived here." "What? You're a lying, sneaky coward. You're the worst." Carol turned pale. "In that case, let's discuss this through our lawyers." "But Carol, I haven't forgotten that you told me not to touch my grandson with my dirty hands and that you cut us off." "Exactly. You were the one who said you wanted nothing to do with us, so it's too late now to say you want to live together." When Jason and I said this, Carol collapsed to her knees, unable to respond. Muttering complaints with a resentful look, she left the room. And so, Jason and I began living with Matthew and our grandchild, the four of us together in the high-rise apartment. For a while, Matthew was downcast, saying, "Why am I so bad at picking women?" "I'm sorry. It's my fault for saying I wanted to live in a high-rise apartment in the first place," Jason said, even though it wasn't really his fault. I understood why he might feel responsible. "Well, it's just bad luck. Just a coincidence that you had two bad experiences in a row. You'll find the right person someday," I reassured him. "No, it's fine. I have my son, and Dad and Mom are in good health. I'm happy enough." But Matthew replied with a slightly sad smile. Carol returned to her parents' house after divorcing Matthew, but her parents were fed up with how she kept leaving her newborn behind to go out and party. They also discovered she had debts and scolded her, saying she couldn't stay with them if she didn't work. However, she had gained so much weight that it was hard to find a job. Ironically, she ended up working as a cleaner, a job she had looked down on, while being treated as an incompetent older woman. Given her previous attitude, it's no wonder her colleagues disliked her. Matthew occasionally received messages from Carol asking to reconcile, but he now ignores them without even reading them. Jason and I were overjoyed to be able to live with our grandchild, but taking care of a baby in our 70s was far more challenging than we had imagined. A grandchild is adorable when you only see them for a few hours at a time, but we had forgotten how demanding raising a child could be. I came to realize how amazing it was that Matthew had been managing both work and childcare for a year while his wife had all but abandoned her responsibilities. "Are you sure you're not too tired, Dad and Mom? Why don't we hire a babysitter?" Matthew suggested, and we decided to take him up on it. A 36-year-old single mother named Susan started coming to help with our grandchild from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. She's the mother of a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. As a mother in the midst of raising her own children, Susan is incredibly efficient and hardworking. As the breadwinner, she's very diligent. She even makes lunch for Jason and me, and sometimes we cook and eat together. This 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. schedule really helps me. I can get my kids off to school, come here to work, do some shopping, and still make it home in time to prepare dinner," she said, clearly pleased with the arrangement. She mentioned that she lives with her 2 children and they all work together to manage the household. Over time, we became quite close, and she shared with us that she divorced her husband because he was addicted to gambling and showed no signs of changing. She doesn't receive any child support or alimony. Susan is a bright and wonderful woman with a strong spirit. Jason and I grew very fond of her, so we invited her and her children to come over for a meal on one of her days off, a Sunday. Susan was delighted to accept our invitation. "Are you sure? When I told my kids that I work at a high-rise apartment, they were so envious. They've been saying they'd love to visit." Susan's children were well-mannered, energetic, and adorable, and they quickly became friends with our nearly 2-year-old grandchild. This high-rise apartment is amazing. The cars look so tiny from up here. The kids were thrilled and excited, and it was a joy to watch them. The younger boy was fascinated by Jason's collection of plastic model kits, and Jason, pleased, showed him various robots and fighter planes, clearly enjoying himself. Since Susan had weekends off, it was the first time she met Matthew. They greeted each other with a polite "nice to meet you." "Thank you for taking care of my son and my parents." And Matthew added, "Thank you for the opportunity." Susan replied, and they both laughed, commenting on how this situation felt a bit strange. The truth is, the reason Jason and I invited Susan and her children over was to introduce her to our son. Jason and I had both thought, wouldn't she make a wonderful daughter-in-law? However, we didn't want to force anything, so after introducing them, we decided to leave it to them to see where things might go. Susan already knew some of our situation, as she was helping take care of our young grandchild. "I can't believe there's a mother who wouldn't want to care for such an adorable child," she had said, surprised. Matthew and Susan were sitting on the living room chairs, watching the children play. "There's something nice about this, the sound of children laughing," Matthew said thoughtfully. "Yes, it's wonderful. And it's so lovely to see a couple like your parents cooking together," Susan replied. Since the kitchen was open concept, Jason and I could hear their conversation. "Dad started taking cooking classes after he retired to help out Mom, who was still working," Matthew revealed, making Jason a bit bashful. "That's wonderful. I always wanted to have a marriage like that, but I failed," Susan admitted. "Me too," Matthew responded. I exchanged a glance with Jason, signaling that things were going well. And he nodded in agreement. Susan, have you ever thought about living in a high-rise apartment?" Matthew suddenly asked, diving right into the heart of the matter. Jason and I tensed up a bit at the directness of his question. "Well, this place is lovely, but I think it's more important who you live with than where you live," Susan answered, likely giving the perfect response. At that moment, I was sure that Matthew had fallen in love. After that, Susan and her children started visiting us on weekends, and the four of them, including our grandchild, would go out together. They looked just like a happy, long-time married couple and their children. Perhaps Susan, being a smart woman, sensed Matthew's past traumas and managed to connect with him in a way that healed his heart. If that were the case, I thought, then it was a good thing. I believed that her intelligence would allow her to keep things together and build a happy family. About a year after we had all become so close, Matthew came to Jason and me with a serious expression. "I'm thinking of proposing to Susan. Do you think you and Dad would approve?" Jason and I exchanged glances and nodded. "It's about time, right, Jason?" "Yeah, I was wondering when you'd bring it up." "Of course, we approve." "Absolutely," I added. "Hey, can't you put the house in my name? I'm gonna get it when you die anyway, so we might as well change it now, right?" Vernon, my son, suggests nonchalantly. He's holding the deed to the 0.1-acre house he just purchased the other day, flapping it around and looking at me expectantly. "You see, that house is—" "Never mind all that, just hurry up and do the paperwork," he interrupts. Vernon grins from ear to ear, his arm around his wife's shoulder, looking mighty pleased with himself. His wife is smirking too. "Since you and Roseanne don't have much time left, we'll be the ones living there properly. We're letting you live with your grandkids, so you should be grateful," she says presumptuously, as if we asked for any of this. The couple snickers. They won't listen to a word I say. Even when I try to explain the situation with the property correctly, they brush it off as lies. Instead, Vernon points to the calendar and laughs. We're moving in next week, so get ready to help us unpack. I had no choice but to hold back my laughter at his words. My name is Roseanne, and I'm turning 60 this year. Up until a few years ago, I was working part-time. However, when my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I quit my job to take care of him. Now, I live with my father in my childhood home. I have a husband named Abel who is 3 years older than me, but since I moved back home, he's been living almost alone in our house. With his nearing retirement age and not wanting to burden my sick father by moving in together, he decided to stay put. Abel, who I've been with for 40 years, has a very kind personality. Unlike most men his age, he helps out with housework and has been saving money for our retirement. But he has one flaw. He spoils our son, Vernon, too much. I married Abel when I was 20 years old. We had a happy marriage, but for many years we couldn't have children. After seeing doctors for a decade, we were finally blessed with a baby boy. I understand the desire to fulfill every wish of our long-awaited son, Vernon. However, indulging a child's every whim only leads to raising a selfish brat. Toys, sweets, allowance. Abel was lenient with him on all fronts. Of course, we had countless discussions about it as a couple. I tried to convince him that spoiling Vernon wasn't good for him. Each time, he would apologize with a guilty look and vow to do better starting tomorrow. But his determination was all talk. In the end, he'd always cave to Vernon's wheedling and buy him whatever he wanted. To try and maintain some balance, I was strict with Vernon to make up for Abel's leniency. No playing with toys until homework was finished, no stuffing himself with sweets before dinner, no more allowance until next month if he used it all up. It was all basic stuff, but I suppose Vernon didn't find it very amusing. He was going through his rebellious and pubescent phases, but in Vernon's mind, Abel had become the Superman who could make anything happen, while I turned into the nagging mother. Once he reached high school, he started buying only prepared meals and bread from the school store or on his way home. Considering the appetite of a high school boy, it was understandable, so I didn't stop him. But I at least tried to balance his nutrition by including more vegetables in our meals at home. Then one day, he slammed his hand on the table and yelled, "Hey Mom, why the hell are you only serving veggies every day? Give me some meat." Meat. As I stood there feeling defeated from being called Mom to my face, Abel grabbed Vernon's shoulder firmly. "What's with that tone? Who do you think you are?" Perhaps being yelled at like that by Abel, who was usually lenient with him, was quite a shock. Vernon threw an apology my way in a small voice. After that, Vernon's rebellious phase seemed to settle down a bit. He even started studying hard, but unfortunately, he didn't get into his first choice school. He took several entrance exams and ended up enrolling in a university far away that accepted him. Moving preparations, carrying his belongings into the dorm, attending Vernon's entrance ceremony, that was the last memory we had as a family of 3. After starting college, Vernon stopped coming home. Maybe the city life was exciting, but whenever we contacted him, all we got was, "I'm busy with studying." Honestly, I even wondered if he was out partying, but constantly monitoring the behavior of a college student didn't seem right, so we were left feeling anxious. Even when we said we'd come to see him, it's never a good time. We tried showing up unannounced, but even after waiting all night, there was no sign of him coming back. In the end, we couldn't meet him. The only time Vernon came home was during the Christmas holidays of his first 2 years. Other than that, the only contact we got was him asking for more allowance because he didn't have enough money. Maybe all that studying paid off, because after graduating from university, Vernon was able to get a job at a fairly large company. When he finally came back, He said he was moving from the dorm to a place near his company and needed money to buy necessary appliances. It wasn't just a job report, but also a request for money. However, as a celebration for his graduation and new job, we gave him the money as a couple. But Vernon ended up quitting the big company he had just joined after only 2 weeks. "There are only ugly chicks there. I don't want to work surrounded by monsters with faces scoring 5 or less." I just couldn't accept him quitting for such a ridiculous reason. What do you think you're going to a company for? Selfishly rating people's faces, and then quitting for a reason like that. How pathetic. Yeah, whatever. And here I thought your son was finally gonna make it big and earn some dough. Aren't you ashamed of relying on your son's income? He was a complete stranger to me. His way of speaking and thinking was becoming more and more like the people he called his online friends. "But I can still work and I'll find a company with cuter girls," he said, frequently job hunting and getting hired quite often. He was originally a serious person with good social skills. Getting in was relatively easy, but sticking with it was the hard part. He never held the same job for more than 2 years. Everywhere he went, he complained about the female employees not being cute enough, the lack of beautiful single women, having more talented peers, or not liking being treated like a child by his superiors. He would quit easily for reasons I couldn't even fathom. No matter how many times I tried to convince him, it fell on deaf ears. Exhausted, I stopped contacting him altogether. When he was a child, it was one thing, but now that he was an adult, he had to take responsibility for his own life. Similarly, he never contacted us except to ask for money. And when I stopped giving him money, the contact stopped abruptly. Around the time we stopped bringing up Vernon in conversation, the now 27-year-old, he suddenly showed up at our house. And he brought a pregnant woman with him. "I got married. Lucia is pregnant now," he announced. "Married? When?" I asked. Apparently, they had been married for a year already. Neither Abel nor I had heard anything about it, and all we could do was give him a suspicious look, wondering why he was telling us now. "Actually, I quit my job. And Lucia needs to take maternity leave soon, so we're worried about making ends meet. So, He looked at us hesitantly, grinning sheepishly when our eyes met. Rather than feeling joy about Vernon getting married or having a grandchild, a sense of resignation welled up inside me first. Of course, it was about money. But I slowly shook my head from side to side. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you out. My father's health is deteriorating, so I'll be staying at my parents' house to take care of him for the time being. Abel will stay at our place, but not indefinitely," I told him. At my words, "What?" Vernon let out a stunned. The truth was, my father had been diagnosed with cancer and was already in the terminal stages, according to the doctors. To fulfill my father's wish to spend his final days at home rather than undergoing painful life-prolonging treatments, I was planning to move back to my childhood home alone. So I made it clear in advance that I wouldn't be able to support the two of them at home or help with Lucia's childbirth itself. Vernon and Lucia also hung their heads heavily and offered their prayers for my father. I realized it was all an act and an appeal to me in less than a month. Shortly after I returned to my parents' house, I received a message from Abel. "Vernon and his wife have been staying at our house all the time. The baby is constantly crying, and it's tough." Apparently, after I left, Vernon and his family had moved in and were making themselves at home as they pleased. They asked Abel to take care of Lucia and the baby, but it didn't seem like Vernon was job hunting in the meantime. Because Vernon had repeated quitting jobs for selfish reasons too many times, his work history was a mess. Now that he was approaching 30, his chances of getting hired were pretty low. Yet, he wasn't enthusiastic about job hunting and only rarely went to take employment exams. So he was mostly doing short-term and day labor part-time jobs, but he apparently never gave any of that money to Abel for living expenses or rent. On top of that, he freely used the groceries and took baths as he pleased. Babies may cry for a living, but having them move in unexpectedly and hearing their cries every day and night made even Abel complain. However, the couple only insisted on how much money it takes to raise a child, showing no intention of paying and only taking photos of the baby together. There's just no helping it. I'd like to move in with you, but if Vernon and his family tag along, it'll be a nuisance to your dad, Abel said. I couldn't refute his words. If those two were using our rent-free home as their base, there was a high chance they would follow us if we moved out. As it was, they were already asking about my father's condition every day and inquiring about the renovations of my parents' house in detail. To begin with, both our home and my parents' house were old and not suitable for raising children, considering the surrounding facilities. While I was worrying that it would undoubtedly lead to trouble, my father finally passed away. A few days after the funeral, where relatives gathered together. It was when we were all sharing our thoughts about my father and considering our future plans. For some reason, Vernon was trying to attend the discussion about the inheritance. Why is Vernon here? Today's discussion is only for the heirs, right? My brother Laughlin questioned. What? I can't inherit anything? Vernon responded to Laughlin's question with a blank look on his face. Since Dad hadn't named Vernon in his will to leave him anything, we told him we would proceed according to the law as siblings. He let out an obvious sigh. Without a word of greeting, he left without even closing the door, making me involuntarily grimace. What's with his attitude? Laughlin said indignantly. I'm really sorry. I tried to calm my furious brother, but I felt the same way. Vernon, who had apparently been after Dad's inheritance, stopped asking about my parents' house and Dad's estate as soon as he learned he had no right to inherit. The discussion about dividing the inheritance was settled, and a few days passed. When I returned home for the first time in a while, it had changed so much that it felt like someone else's house. Abel looked exhausted, while only Vernon, his wife, and their child seemed full of energy. But I grew concerned about how thin my grandchild was. What? Isn't this child too skinny? Is everything okay? Oh, it's fine. The doctor mentioned it during checkups, but apparently the baby is just petite. Well, I haven't been eating very well, so I guess the baby isn't getting enough nutrition. Lucia laughed as if it were someone else's problem. I hurriedly started preparing meals. Since they weren't using formula and the baby wasn't old enough to start solid foods yet, it was meaningless if Lucia didn't eat properly. I diligently planned out menus, thinking my grandchild was innocent in all this. As a result, Vernon and his wife started staying just for the meals. They demanded this and that, claiming it was good for breast milk, but never paid a dime or showed any gratitude. The only solace was that my grandchild was getting plumper. I was fed up with Vernon, who was supposed to be an adult but left all the housework to me, and Lucia, who went along with it as if it were only natural. I tried to have discussions with them multiple times, telling them it was a burden, but they only responded with emotional arguments about how happy we must be to live with our grandchild. I was considering moving out to force them out when Vernon casually looked around the house and laughed. Hey, where's Abel been lately? I thought Roseanne was back, but now Abel's gone. Weird, huh? Wait, don't tell me you're planning to divorce? If Roseanne leaves, we'll be in trouble for food, so don't do that. Seeing him blatantly look down on me and laugh, I glared at Vernon, suddenly feeling angry. Abel is just out and about preparing for the move and greeting people around our new place. And what do you mean, you'll be in trouble? How long do you plan on staying in this house? You're still job hunting, right? We'll be in trouble if you don't hurry up and find a job and a place of your own. Despite being told numerous times before, Vernon seemed shocked to be clearly told to leave and shifted his gaze around in distress. When I pressed him further, he slammed his hand on the table. You don't have to be so harsh. You can only say that because you don't know how tough I have it. Parents are supposed to help their struggling son and grandchild, aren't they? Never holding down a stable job, forcibly moving in and making us prepare meals and baths, taking care of your child, and on top of that, not contributing to living expenses. Do you really think it's only natural for parents to support that kind of lifestyle? It's about time you gain some self-awareness as an adult. I retorted without hesitation, and Vernon abruptly stood up and stormed out of the room. I raised my voice at his back. Abel and I are selling this house and moving in 6 months. You two better figure out what you're going to do by then. Perhaps surprised by those words, Vernon turned around and looked at me in shock. But maybe pressured by my intensity, he silently left the living room. Yet, when dinner time came, he ate every last bite with a scowl on his face as if he were angry. It was beyond my control. As Abel and I proceeded with moving preparations, Vernon seemed to realize we were serious. Only now did he tearfully tell us how much trouble it would be to lose the house and talk about work and income. But those words no longer touched my heart, and I steadily continued the preparations. Finally, the day came when we were packing up our belongings, counting down to the move. When I got home, Vernon and Lucia ran up to me in an annoyingly good mood. You did it, Roseanne! I can't believe you found such a big house for us! Vernon exclaimed. Huh? I thought suspiciously, wondering what on earth he was talking about. Vernon thrust a document in front of my face. It was a copy of the deed for a 0.1-acre single-family house. The moment I saw it, my face turned bright red with anger. Why do you have that? You broke the lock and found it, didn't you? What's the big deal? Anyway, when are we moving? A 0.1-acre house must be huge, right? That document was tucked away in a drawer of my desk in my room, not something that was left in the living room by mistake. I had purposely put it in a locked cabinet, afraid of Vernon entering my room, and yet here it was in Vernon's own hands. I hurried to my room and found that the keyhole of the drawer had been completely tampered with, forced open with brute strength. Upon closer inspection, other storage areas had been rummaged through as well, with drawers half open and items that should have been put away scattered about. No matter how much we lived together, this was absolutely unforgivable. I yelled at him, but Vernon just grinned sheepishly. You thief! I've told you time and time again, I can't live with you anymore. I'm moving, but you can't live in that house. I absolutely refuse to live with you after moving. Take care of your own life. There you go again, saying things like that. Sure, this house is too small for the 5 of us. That's why you bought a bigger house, right? And yet you're saying stuff like this. Honey, don't talk to Roseanne like that. It's rude. But Roseanne, thank you so much. I explained over and over that the house wasn't meant for living in, but they wouldn't listen, asking why I had the rights to such a building if that was the case. It was hopeless. Vernon was preparing to go out in high spirits, and Lucia, holding their child, was following along excitedly. Well, we're gonna go check out refrigerators and washing machines. If we find good ones, we'll write down the model numbers. Let's all go shopping together next time. See ya. I was dumbfounded that they expected us to buy even those, but if they were going out, it was a chance. I quickly called Abel and told him again that there was no hope for them. After a deep, long sigh, he said we should move as soon as possible. Vernon and his family came back once late at night, but they were drunk and showed no signs of listening to me. They were convinced they could live with us in the new house, talking about the layout and where to put the appliances, no matter how many times I said we wouldn't be living together. The next day, Vernon and his family went out again, saying they were going to look at beds this time, heading to a store that sold large furniture. I threw all of Vernon's belongings into a rental storage unit and put the key in our home's mailbox. I left a handwritten note and sent an email to both of them, then locked up the house and left. It was 3 days later when I got a call from Vernon. "Hey Roseanne, what's going on?" I could hear the voices of confused men behind Vernon. "What about the 0.1 acre house? Why is there only this shabby shack?" At those words, it dawned on me. Geez, he was way too slow to catch on. "What do you mean? That's the only building there. I told you countless times, didn't I? That house isn't the kind of place a family can live in," I said. Vernon was still shouting, but gradually losing steam. I had repeatedly told Vernon and Lucia over and over again. They must have brushed it off as me being shy or something, gone to the site, seen the actual house, and finally realized it was true. But then why did you buy such a big plot of land? Oh, are you going to rebuild here? Then you should have said so from the start." "No, that's not it. You looked at the deed without permission, and you still don't get it? There should have been various things inside, like the inheritance distribution agreement. We didn't buy that land, we inherited it from grandfather." I could tell Vernon was at a loss for words on the other end of the line. I sighed and pressed my finger against my brow. Despite talking about it so many times, the fact that he really hadn't been listening gave me a headache. It was a plot of land grandfather had used for a home garden, and nearby there was only a shed for storing farming equipment and a small cabin with just a kitchen and bath for simple overnight stays. Even that had been left completely untouched while grandfather was fighting his illness, so by now, it was probably overgrown with weeds. More than anything, I told him, "If you looked at the deed, it should have been clearly written. Most of that wide expanse of land you see belongs to someone else's fields, so don't go doing anything reckless. Deeds don't use units like acres." So, to begin with, the idea of a 0.1 acre house was wrong from the start. Vernon had been silent for a while, but suddenly he began shouting, "This is fraud! Roseanne tricked us! We don't even have a place to live now! Take responsibility! Don't be ridiculous! I told you over and over, we can't live together anymore. It's not like I threw you out at the drop of a hat, right? I've talked about this countless times since grandfather passed away, and I've told you repeatedly that you're misunderstanding. You're the ones who wouldn't listen and just charged ahead on your own." As we yelled at each other, there was a rustling sound. And then Lucia's screaming voice could be heard immediately. "I didn't hear that. Tricking us and kicking us out is too cruel. Our child is still little. What are you going to do about our livelihood? If you're getting rid of that house and not living here, that means you have a separate base of operations, right? Tell us right now, we're moving in with you." "I'm telling you, it's impossible. I absolutely refuse to live with you anymore. You're adults, and you even have a child. It's about time you walked your own path in life." Then Vernon's voice rang out loudly. "Dad! Put Dad on the phone!" I was listening in. "Let me tell you, we can't live with you anymore. If we're around, you'll just scream and shout without doing anything for yourselves. That's why I won't tell you where our new place is, and we won't provide any support from now on. Even if it means not being able to see our grandchild, so be it. Please, just let us go." I could tell Vernon sharply inhaled at his strained voice. I gently patted his shoulder and called out to Vernon, "Let me tell you again, we won't be seeing you anymore. From now on, you two raise your child properly. To do that, you need to start by holding down a proper job. Take care of your health, all three of you."
"Wait, Mom!"
Before I could finish hearing those words, I moved my finger to the end call button on my smartphone. Then Lucia's scream echoed through the receiver.
"Unbelievable! Unbelievable! Hey, what are we going to do about our lives from now on? We somehow managed even when you weren't working because your parents were there. But what are we supposed to do with just the two of us now? If you had just looked at the documents properly, this wouldn't have happened."
"Huh? Don't blame it all on me. You saw those documents too and were happy together about the 0.1 acre house. Besides, you haven't been working at all either. Don't complain only to me." Hearing the couple's fight, I grew worried about my grandchild. But Abel quietly reached out his finger and pressed the end call button for me. Looking at the phone that instantly fell silent, we both let out a deep sigh. Abel had tried to continue supporting the two of them somehow, thinking it was his fault for spoiling Vernon, but it ended without any effect. But honestly, it probably wasn't Abel's fault. Him spoiling Vernon was when he was little, and at least while he was in college and right after graduating, he still kept in touch and had proper conversations with us. But then Vernon started repeating job changes for nonsensical reasons and hanging out only with online friends who encouraged those job changes, and it became unstoppable. This education is a parent's duty, but if it manifested after he became an adult, we can't take responsibility anymore. We patiently dealt with him many times, but if he deteriorated with a similar wife, there was nothing we could do. A few months passed as we thought we no longer had him or our grandchild. I was tending to grandfather's home garden and watering the vegetables when suddenly I heard a voice from behind me. I turned around to find a haggard Vernon standing there.
"Mom, please, help me!"
Vernon, who had become much thinner since the last time I saw him, started ranting at me as I remained silent. I got divorced from Lucia. I cheated on her. But it couldn't be helped, right? It was good that we found an apartment after that, but since then, all she ever talked to me about was work or money. She wasn't cute at all, and even when I told her to put our son in daycare and work, she only said she didn't want to because it was too much trouble. And then, there was this super cute girl at my new job. It's not my fault, right? I was working hard for my family, but that family didn't cherish me. I was so dumbfounded I couldn't even speak. I turned off the water from the hose and started cleaning up as I was. Vernon watched me as he continued throwing words at me, ignoring him.
"When Lucia found out about the affair, she flew into a rage, demanding a divorce. She took our son, but then she started demanding hundreds of thousands in compensation and child support from me for the divorce trial over my cheating. Isn't that insane? Who does she think drove me to have an affair? Please, Roseanne, I don't have any savings, so please pay the consolation money. You have grandfather's inheritance, right? If that's not possible, sell this land."
Finally, my anger exploded at his unbelievable words, and I glared at him.
"You're always talking about money, money. You and Lucia are the same, only ever talking about money. Why should I have to cover for your mess? If you had a woman you wanted to be with more than Lucia, you should have just gotten a divorce and then started a relationship. It's pathetic that you're talking as if you're the victim. Neither your dad nor I will do anything to help you. Even if you're going through a tough time, who would help a man who still relies on his parents and even tells them to give up their inheritance? No way! Your precious son is going through such a hard time, and you don't feel anything? I do have feelings about it. The Vernon we raised with care has turned into such a good-for-nothing. But if we helped you here, you would just keep thinking that your parents will somehow take care of things when you're in trouble. We won't be around forever either. You need to take responsibility for your own messes. With that, I finished cleaning up and left the field. He persistently followed me, but he seemed to notice the people around us whispering and looking at him. The moment he heard words like police and report, he ran away crying. I immediately contacted Abel and told him to be careful around the area for a while. But he never came after that. Apparently, he was also fighting with his affair partner over consolation money and had no time for anything else. Once a year, we receive a photo of our grandchild from Lucia's parents. For now, it seems they are not lacking anything with the help of her parents, as the photos show the child growing up plump and healthy. It's a sad story, but our lives have become terribly calm since being freed from Vernon and his family. It has become peaceful. I regret that we couldn't kick Vernon out sooner because we were busy with grandfather's thing and moving. Now, our only hope is for our grandchild to live happily. Even today, I continue my life of going to see the vegetables in the home garden together with my husband. I can't do it. I just can't take on that kind of responsibility.
But Kate, you just started your new job this year. It would be so hard for you to take in and raise a brother who isn't even your blood. My brother Henry and I became siblings through our parents' remarriage. Our parents died suddenly, and now the relatives were discussing what to do with Henry, who was still in middle school. I glanced worriedly at Henry, but he kept staring out the window, avoiding any eye contact with me. We had finally become a family, but it seemed like Henry was closing himself off again. Despite Henry's withdrawn demeanor, the relatives continued their discussion, indifferent to his feelings. It's sad, but I think putting him in a foster home might be the best option. No one said a word. No one opposed the idea. A foster home? I was in shock when Henry, still staring out the window, spoke up. I'll go to the foster home. Henry's voice was completely devoid of emotion, and it made me stand up impulsively.
You don't have to go to any foster home. I'll take care of you.
All the relatives turned to me in surprise. Even Henry looked back at me, startled. I looked straight at Henry and said,
Henry, we're family, right? I'm your sister, aren't I?
Henry began to cry. Thank you, Kate. I hugged the crying Henry tightly, rubbing his back over and over. The next morning, I woke up to the sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. It was 9 a.m. I need to make breakfast for Henry. I hurriedly got up and went to the living room.
Good morning. Henry? Henry? Where are you?
He wasn't in the living room, the restroom, or his room. A bad feeling crept up on me. Could Henry have left the house, worried about what the relatives said? I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't think straight. My name is Kate.
Mom, what are you doing?
Mary, my daughter, looked puzzled as she saw me vacuuming thoroughly after moving the TV stand. Henry's bringing a guest over, so I'm cleaning up the place. I wouldn't go this far for just one of Mary's friends, but this guest was very important. Ever since Henry contacted me, I hadn't been able to stay calm.
Is this it, Mom?
At some point, Mary had opened the photo album that had been left on the table. I found it while organizing the shelves in the living room where I keep the photo albums. I had set it aside to look at later but completely forgot about it. When Mary pointed to a picture, it showed me as a high schooler and Henry with a tense expression. Yeah, that's me in high school. And that's Henry.
Henry was so small back then?
Yeah, there's a 9-year age gap between us. I was 18 and Henry was only 9. We had just met, so neither of us was smiling.
Just met?
That's right. Henry and I aren't biological siblings. My mother, Jane, married Henry's father, Tom, when I was in 11th grade, and that's how we became a family. The man who used to be my father never cared about family matters. He came home late every night, and he was hardly ever around on weekends. But when he was home, he treated my mom like a housekeeper. He never did anything to me directly. It was more like he had no interest in me at all. But whenever he was home, there was a constant tension in the air, and I remember how much I dreaded being around him.
Hey, Mom, are all dads like that?
I guess they are. When I was little, I thought all dads were like that, but as I grew up, I realized my father was different. My friends would talk about practicing for a marathon with their dad, cooking with him for their mom's birthday. Their stories were always about dads being a part of the family, enjoying time together. I also realized that my mom really wanted to escape from this uncomfortable life, but stayed because she felt she had to raise me. I'm sure it was tough for her to support the two of us on her temp job income alone. I wished she could have put her feelings first, but I was just a kid in elementary school. All I could do was help where I could, feeling guilty and troubled by the situation. But just before I entered middle school, my mom finally decided to get a divorce. I don't know what triggered it. When she talked to me about the divorce, I remember feeling a deep sense of relief. Finally, my mom could find peace at home. Our father, who had no interest in us, quickly agreed to the divorce. He left without contesting custody. So, while things went smoothly between the parties involved,
Jane, Kate is going to need money for the future. He didn't cheat on you, so why don't you just bear with it a little longer?
My grandmother and tried to persuade my mother to cancel the divorce until the very end.
I won't let Kate feel deprived of anything. I'll raise her properly on my own. You're just a temp worker. There's no way you can manage. That's not true. I'll do whatever it takes for my family. If you won't listen to my advice, then do whatever you want. But don't you dare come running to me for help. You need to take responsibility for the path you've chosen.
Do whatever you want, that was too harsh. I couldn't understand why Anne, who was usually so kind, was being so strict with my mom this time. It made me angry. But my mom stood her ground, even with Anne.
I understand. I take full responsibility for raising Kate.
I felt sorry for my mom, who now had a rift with her own mother because of the divorce, but she was strong in her decision. After it was just the two of us, my mom distanced herself from Anne and the rest of the family, working tirelessly to raise me on her own. After finishing her day job, she would come home to cook dinner, and then quickly head out for her night job.
Are you enjoying school? Kate, you don't have to hold back.
Every month, she gave me the same allowance as the other kids. Mom, don't push yourself too hard. As a middle schooler, I often felt lonely spending nights alone and worried about my mom working so much, but that was all I could manage to say.
I'm not pushing myself at all. Kate, your future is limitless. I'm feeling so fulfilled right now.
When she said that with a gentle smile, I decided that I would go to a commercial high school, get certified, and start working as soon as I graduated so I could ease her burden. But someone came into our lives before I could do that, someone who wanted to make things easier for her and truly cared about her. That person was Tom.
I was drawn to Jane's kindness and strength, and I wanted to become a family. Kate, I know you might feel like you don't need a father anymore, but I really want to be a part of your family.
Tom was the kind of man who would say exactly what he felt with a gentle smile. When we went shopping, he would push the cart himself and never let my mom carry heavy bags. He would hold the door until my mom and I had passed through. Tom did these things naturally, and I liked him immediately. More than anything, I was thrilled that my mom looked so relaxed and happy when she was with Tom. So I fully supported their marriage. Thus, when I was in 11th grade, my mom and Tom got remarried. For someone like me who had spent so much time alone at home, this brought a lively and peaceful life into our household. Finally, I had a normal family. I was so happy, but there was one thing I was worried about. That was Tom's 3rd grade son, Henry.
Want to go get some snacks together?
No. Even after a month of living together, Henry wouldn't make eye contact with my mom or me and kept his heart closed. Before the remarriage, Tom had told us that Henry hadn't been treated well by his birth mother. We tried everything to get Henry to open up to us.
Henry, what would you like for dinner?
Anything's fine.
You can pick whatever show you want to watch.
Anything's okay. Despite his curt responses, we kept talking to Henry with patience. Family means warmth. Just as I was happy now because I felt that warmth, I wanted Henry to experience this happiness with us too. But there was little progress, and before we knew it, 3 months had passed since the remarriage.
Do you have any plans this Saturday?
Expecting to be rejected as usual, I asked Henry if he wanted to go to the library, but after a moment of silence, he hesitantly asked us, "My friends want to come over on Saturday. Is that okay?" My mom and I exchanged surprised and delighted looks.
Of course it's okay. How many friends?
4.
That sounds fun. If you play cards, let me join in.
I don't think we'll play cards. Henry looked a bit troubled, and I found it adorable and endearing.
What kind of snacks would you like?
You don't need to go to any trouble, Henry said, trying to be considerate, before quickly heading to his room, looking embarrassed. He must have really made an effort to talk to us. We felt the gap between us closing, and it made us happy. Then Saturday came. 4 lively boys arrived at our home. Henry must be having a great time with these 4 friends at school too. Seeing his friends reassured me. When my mom brought Henry's favorite cheesecake to his room, the boys cheered.
I've never seen Henry smile like that before.
My mom looked very satisfied. That night, at dinner, Henry said, "Thank you for today. It's the first time I've had friends over." They were all really impressed with the cheesecake, saying it was amazing. They said I'm lucky to have a kind and great cooking mom.
That's so nice of them to say. Henry, you've got some really good friends. Tell them they're welcome anytime.
Really?
Of course.
And Henry turned to me this time. They were jealous.
Of what?
Of having a beautiful sister. We didn't have time today, but let's play cards together next time. Henry's words made me really happy too.
Sure. I'm not going to lose to elementary school kids.
Seeing Henry smile made me even happier. Henry hesitated a little, but then took a deep breath. Mom, Kate, thank you so much. What? Henry finally called us Mom and Kate. Hearing those words, my mom and I were deeply moved. Henry looked straight at us. Everything is going to be okay. I felt a deep sense of relief. From that day on, Henry fully opened his heart to us, and we became a real family. We went shopping together, ate delicious meals together. It was everything I had dreamed of doing with a family. And thanks to Tom becoming our dad, my mom no longer had to work 2 jobs, and I didn't have to drop out of school to work either.
Don't worry about money. Just focus on thinking about your future.
Encouraged by Tom, I decided to go to college to study design, something I was interested in. I believe getting divorced was the right choice, and I had no complaints about living with just my mom. But now that we were a family of 4, I couldn't help but wish every night that this happiness would last forever. If I wished every night, this life would continue. That's what I believed, but 3 years after the remarriage, tragedy struck Henry and me. Our parents were killed in a car accident. I had just started my career at 21, and Henry was only 12. The event was so sudden that I was in shock, and I barely remember anything about the funeral. The only thought in my mind was that I had to protect Henry. I was more focused on Henry than on grieving the loss of our parents. At the funeral, nearly 10 of Tom's relatives, whom I had never met before, attended. How sad, at such a young age. They looked at Henry and me with pity. At the same time, they began discussing what to do with Henry. At first, they behaved normally in front of Henry and me, but as the discussion dragged on without resolution, their patience seemed to wear thin.
I can't do it. I just can't take on that kind of responsibility.
But Kate just started her new job this year. It would be so hard for her to take in and raise a brother who isn't even her blood. They spoke loudly enough for us to hear clearly, discussing Henry's future. I glanced at Henry worriedly, but he kept staring out the window, refusing to make eye contact with me. We had finally become a family, but it seemed like Henry was closing himself off again. Despite Henry's withdrawn demeanor, the relatives continued their discussion, indifferent to his feelings. It's sad, but I think putting him in a foster home might be the best option. No one said a word. No one opposed the idea. A foster home? I was in shock when Henry, still staring out the window, spoke up. I'll go to the foster home. Henry's voice was completely devoid of emotion, and it made me stand up impulsively.
You don't have to go to any foster home. I'll take care of you.
All the relatives turned to me in surprise. Even Henry looked back at me, startled. I looked straight at Henry and said, Henry, we're family, right? I'm your sister, aren't I? I walked over to Henry, meeting his eyes. When you called me Kate, it made me so happy. It doesn't matter if we're blood related or not. We know that better than anyone. We're a real family, aren't we? Henry began to cry. Thank you, Kate. I held the still crying Henry tightly and spoke to my late parents in my heart. Mom, Dad, I'm really scared, but I promise I'll protect Henry, because he's my precious family. So please, watch over us. I kept rubbing Henry's back until he calmed down in my arms. That night, when we got home, Henry quickly fell asleep, exhausted. The house felt quiet and lonely without our parents. Though I had tried to stay composed in front of Henry, being alone brought on a crushing sense of uncertainty. Could I really raise Henry into a good adult, now that he had just started middle school? Would my decision to take him in cause him unnecessary financial hardship? The more I thought about it, the more the anxiety grew until I couldn't handle it anymore. So I crawled into bed and squeezed my eyes shut. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. It was 9 a.m. I need to make breakfast for Henry. I quickly got up and rushed to the living room. Good morning.
Henry? Henry? Where?
He wasn't in the living room, the restroom, or his room. A sense of dread washed over me. Could Henry have left the house because of what the relatives said? My mind went blank as panic set in. As I hurried to run outside, still in my pajamas, I heard a faint voice from outside the front door.
Henry!
I flung the door open, and there was Henry, standing face to face with Grandma Ann.
Grandma? What are you doing here?
It had been 12 years since I'd looked Grandma Ann in the eye. Ever since my mom defied her and went through with the divorce, we'd had no contact with her, and even at my parents' funeral yesterday, we only exchanged a few words because we were so busy. Grandma must have regretted not reconciling with my mom before her death. At the funeral, Grandma Ann stood in the corner, staring at my mom's portrait. She looked so heartbroken that I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Kate, I'm sorry. I was so stubborn. Jane raised you on her own, and then you all became a happy family of 4 after she remarried. I should have acknowledged that sooner. Grandma Ann's expression was filled with regret. Yesterday, when I saw you protecting Henry, you reminded me so much of Jane from 9 years ago. 9 years ago, I couldn't help Jane. So this time, I wanted to help, which is why I'm here. Grandma, Grandma Ann's eyes, still as kind and strong as ever, reminded me so much of my late mom, and I felt a sense of comfort.
Why don't you both move in with me? The three of us can live together.
Grandma Ann made this offer. I had been thinking about moving soon, as we were living in a large rental apartment meant for families. Grandma said that she owned her house, so there would be no rent to pay. And since Grandma didn't work, she could help take care of Henry. As someone who had just started working and was struggling to find my own rhythm with lots of overtime, it was a very generous offer. But Grandma's house was about 12 miles away from here. I could commute by train from Grandma's house, but Henry would have to change schools. Henry, you just said you were finally getting used to school. Wouldn't you hate to transfer now? He had only recently told me how he had made friends he liked and started walking home with them. I looked at Henry anxiously, but he didn't seem to be worried about that at all.
I want to live with Grandma.
Grandma Ann smiled and nodded at Henry, and he smiled back. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you so much. And so, we moved to Grandma Ann's house, and our life as a family of 3 began. Moving in with Grandma turned out to be the best decision.
Kate, Henry, breakfast is ready.
Every morning, Grandma Ann would prepare bread, soup, and scrambled eggs for us.
You need to have a proper breakfast to stay energized.
Hearing Grandma Ann say the same thing in the same tone as my mom used to made us feel nostalgic. And when we first tasted Grandma's scrambled eggs, we were amazed that they tasted just like Mom's. Would you have preferred an omelet? Grandma Ann looked at us with concern, and we shook our heads vigorously.
We were just surprised because they taste exactly like Mom's scrambled eggs.
Is that so? Grandma Ann smiled, clearly pleased. I'm sure that when my mom was little, Grandma made breakfast for her just like this every morning. And my mom must have inherited that taste, which has now become a treasured memory for us as Mom's taste. It made me happy to find an unexpected connection to my mom.
I'm home all day with nothing to do, so I'll take care of the house. Kate, you focus on work, and Henry, do your best at school.
Thanks to Grandma Ann, I could focus on my job. And knowing that Henry wasn't alone with Grandma at home made me feel at ease. Henry quickly made friends at his new school and joined the tennis club. Even when he brought home dirty socks every day, Grandma Ann never complained and would magically restore them to their original white, and we were deeply grateful to her. Seeing Henry leave the house happily every morning made me feel that his future was boundless, and it motivated me to work even harder. Although I had never asked Henry about his future dreams, given his good grades, I figured he would aim for college like his friends. Since our parents hadn't left much in the way of an inheritance, I decided to increase my income so that Henry could choose whatever path he wanted.
Hey, Grandma. Mom raised me so well. I never felt miserable, not even once. So now, I want to make sure Henry grows up just as well. That's why I'm thinking about getting a side job to save up more money.
And listened quietly to everything I had to say. Then she said, I won't tell you what to do. I'll support whatever you choose. But don't push yourself too hard. You're the only family Henry has left. Her words hit me hard, and I nodded firmly. I am Henry's only family. I won't let Henry feel that kind of sadness ever again. So, I decided to take on a part-time job at a sports gym 3 nights a week from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. while keeping my full-time job. Kate, you're home late again?
Henry, you're still up? Did you have a good day at school?
Yeah.
Great. Have another fun day tomorrow, okay? Your club match is coming up, so give it your best.
Thanks. You too, Kate, don't overdo it. Thinking about Henry's limitless future made the double shifts seem like nothing. I wondered if Mom had felt the same way. But in a way, I was more fortunate than Mom had been. With and at home taking care of the house and looking after Henry, I had help that Mom never did. If and hadn't been there, Mom must have been worried sick about leaving a middle school me home alone while she worked. Coming home exhausted, doing the housework, waking up earlier than her child to make breakfast. I realized just how incredible my mom had been. Though my busy schedule meant I had less time to talk with Henry, I made sure to attend his club matches whenever I could, cheering him on louder than anyone.
Kate, you're embarrassing me.
Even as he said that, he waved back at me with his friends. Seeing Henry laughing and having fun made me feel content and motivated me to work even harder. Time flew by in the whirlwind of our busy lives, and before I knew it, Henry was in the 7th grade. One day, during my lunch break, I got a call from Henry's school. It was his homeroom teacher.
Is something wrong with Henry?
The teacher's words filled me with despair. I couldn't focus on my work for the rest of the day. I wanted to rush home and talk to Henry, but of all days, I had a shift at the gym. How unlucky could I be? I found myself wishing, for the first time, that I could just get sick and go home. But of course, things never work out that easily. I pushed through the shift until 10 p.m., feeling uneasy the whole time, and then rushed home.
I'm home. Is Henry asleep?
Anne, who had been waiting up for me, looked surprised as I burst into the living room.
He's asleep. Didn't you teach him that being a morning person is better than staying up late?
Anne smiled, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back.
Today, Henry's teacher called. Henry's been missing school about half the time. Even when he goes, he leaves after lunch.
Henry. I felt tears welling up. Maybe I'm just not capable of being a parent. Maybe I've made him feel miserable because his allowance is too small. Maybe he can't confide in me about his problems. And quietly sat me down and began reheating my dinner as she spoke.
Henry thinks of you as his real sister, Kate.
Then why? Why doesn't he talk to me about anything?
Henry feels guilty about how much you're working, Kate.
What? And set my dinner in front of me and sat down, slowly beginning to explain Henry's recent behavior. Henry worries about me working so late. He really wants to stay up and wait for me to come home, but he doesn't want to make me worry, so he goes to bed early. But he can't actually fall asleep until he hears the front door.
Tonight, too, he probably only just now relaxed enough to sleep.
Anne's words made me feel awful. She also told me that Henry had asked her several times whether it was okay for him to stay here, feeling like he was a burden on me, his sister, who wasn't even his real sister.
Whether it's okay. Of course it is, we're family.
I couldn't help but shout. That's right. That's what I told him too. But Henry wants to talk to you, Kate. Just thinking it isn't enough. Feelings need to be expressed. You know that from experience, don't you? Anne's words hit me hard. Seeing the look on my face, and stood up with a smile.
Henry helped me make this meatloaf. Eat it while it's still warm. Good night.
With that, and headed to her room. I buried my face in my hands. Henry was just like I had been back then. When Mom worked day and night for my sake, I was constantly worried about her, feeling helpless because I couldn't do anything to help. I had thought that with and taking care of Henry, everything would be fine. But I was the only one who felt at ease. Henry had been dealing with all kinds of complicated emotions alone in a house without me. And for Henry, and was someone he had only met for the first time at our parents' funeral. For a boy as shy as Henry to agree so readily to live with and, even if it meant transferring schools, he must have done it for my sake. To make things a little easier for me, I realized how little I had understood Henry. I glanced at the plate of meatloaf and took a bite. It's delicious. I need to tell Henry that directly. I remembered the times I had eaten dinner alone as a child, crying because I couldn't tell Mom how good it was. Just living together doesn't make us a real family. Tomorrow, I'll talk to Henry. I made up my mind. The next day was Saturday.
Henry, can we talk?
I took Henry out. We got on the train and headed to the town where the four of us had lived as a family. Why are we going here? Henry looked at me curiously, but I brushed it off and led him to the park where he and I used to play.
No one's here, even on a Saturday.
I sat down on a swing, and Henry sat on the swing next to mine. This place never had many playgrounds, so it was always empty.
Yeah, we could play catch as much as we wanted. I was an only child and a girl, so I had never played catch before. You were the one who taught me how to throw and catch a ball, Henry.
We reminisced about the times when the four of us spent together.
Henry, the meatloaf was delicious. Thank you, and I'm sorry for making you worry.
I apologized for not noticing Henry's feelings at all.
But you know, I really do think of you as my real brother.
I told him how much I was looking forward to his future, how I wanted to support him in pursuing whatever path he chose, and how working wasn't a burden at all.
But I was worried you were pushing yourself too hard for my sake. If it's going to make things tough for you, then I'd rather not go to college.
Henry looked straight at me as he spoke.
I felt the same way when Mom was always working so hard for me.
I remembered myself at Henry's age.
But now, I understand Mom's feelings. Acting for the sake of someone you care about isn't hard at all. In fact, working for the limitless future that awaits you, Henry, gives me a great sense of purpose.
By now, Henry looked like he was about to cry.
Don't cry. Get up.
I got off the swing and motioned for Henry to do the same.
What? Whoa!
I suddenly threw a ball at Henry, but he caught it perfectly. After staring at the ball for a moment, Henry wiped his tears and said, "Thank you, Kate. Can I tell you one more thing?"
Sure.
I want to talk to you more. I really appreciate you thinking about my future, but I want to talk to you like we used to when we were living together as a family. I felt a deep affection for Henry, who blushed as he confessed this honestly.
Okay, I'll figure out a new way to work, so just give me a little time.
Henry smiled and nodded. It had been a long time since I'd seen Henry smile like that. He had grown taller than me, and now he could throw the ball with just the right amount of force so I could catch it. Money is important, but I realized that there are things even more important than that. So, I quit my part-time job at the gym right away. Instead, I enrolled in a course to become a web designer, taking classes in the evenings and on weekends. After gaining the necessary skills and seeing my path clearly, I resigned from my full-time job a year later. I started a new career as a freelance web designer working from home. At first, I relied on my savings to get by, but with my genuine interest in design and the experience I had gained in college, within 6 months, I was earning a stable income.
Welcome home. Did you have a good day at school? Yeah. We've got our final tennis match coming up, so make sure you come to cheer me on. Got it. I'll practice my cheering voice.
Just use your regular voice, please. Now that I was working from home, I could welcome Henry home every day. We'd chat during dinner, watch TV together. We finally found a peaceful, happy life together. Henry, who was always good at studying, got into the local public high school known for its academic excellence. He continued to play tennis, excelling both in his studies and in sports.
Kate, can we talk?
The day before his junior year's parent-teacher conference, Henry, looking a bit nervous, approached me.
I've been thinking. I want to become an elementary school teacher.
I was surprised because, despite all our daily conversations, I had never heard Henry talk about his future dreams before. An elementary school teacher? That's unexpected. Since he was so interested in astronomy, I had assumed he would go into that field.
I want to be like you, Kate. I want to be an adult who can protect the future of kids.
Henry's sincere gaze made me feel a little embarrassed. I haven't done anything that amazing.
But you have. Even though we're not blood related, you've been there for me with all your heart. I want to be the kind of teacher who can be there for kids, even those from complicated backgrounds like mine.
I was so happy to hear that Henry had been thinking that way. Working for the future of children with endless potential is quite rewarding. I knew that one day, Henry would feel the same way about his students. Seeing how much Henry had grown, I vowed to support him wholeheartedly as he pursued his path. True to his word, Henry became an elementary school teacher. Though he faced many challenges and uncertainties, it filled me with joy to see him grow into his role as a teacher every time we met. sadly, and passed away shortly after Henry started his career, but she watched over us with love until the very end. If and hadn't come to our house the day after our parents' funeral, our lives would have turned out very differently. I want to be someone who can give others the sense of comfort and security that Anne gave us. That's what I strive for. By now, I'm sure Anne has reconciled with Mom in heaven, and together with our parents, they're watching over us with care. As for me, I got married to a man I'd been dating for 3 years, right after Henry started his job and moved out. Now, I've renovated Anne's house, filled with memories, and I'm living happily with my new family.
My room is still my room, you know.
That's what Henry says as he continues to keep his manga in what was once his room. He comes to stay with us about once a month. I was genuinely glad to see that Henry had become comfortable enough to be a bit assertive. It meant that he truly considered me family. Henry frequently tends to Anne's grave, and he's a great playmate for my daughter, Mary, which helps me out a lot. But most of all, it reassures me to see Henry's face.
Mom, Mom.
Mary's voice snapped me back to reality.
What? Who's this?
Mary pointed to a photo, one of the 3 of us, that was taken when Henry moved out. It was the only photo of the 3 of us together. In it, Anne was smiling happily, her arm around Henry's shoulders.
That's my grandma. This house was originally hers, you know. Grandma, Henry, and I lived here together for 10 years.
Really? You all look so happy. What a wonderful family. Mary's casual words touched me deeply. Blood ties don't matter, do they? As long as you care for each other and feel happy together, you're a family. I was reminded of that truth.
Next week, Henry is bringing someone he wants to become part of our family. So, let's get back to cleaning. Will you help me?
Yes. Next week, Henry is bringing home his fiancée. I know Henry will build a wonderful family. And I will always, always wish for my brother's happiness.
And I'm so looking forward to next week.
As I spoke to Anne's portrait, I felt as if she smiled. Having poor people around ruins the taste of the food. Go home. Catherine's lips curled into a cruel smirk, her face twisting with malice. Mason nodded in agreement, laughing along with her, his head bobbing up and down repeatedly. I couldn't believe that such inconsiderate people existed in this world. As I opened my mouth to protest, Mom held up her hand to stop me. Her face was etched with barely contained anger, fury seeping through her expression.
You said you work at Liberty Bank, right?
Huh? What does that have to do with anything right now? Catherine retorted mockingly, continuing to sneer at Mom with an unsettling grin. Mom's voice was stern and unwavering as she commanded Catherine.
Go get your president right now.
What? Catherine stared at Mom, dumbfounded by her words. Mason wore the same shocked expression on his face. Oh no, it's over. I thought to myself. They had managed to push my usually gentle and patient mother to her breaking point. There was no way they were going to get away with this unscathed. They would soon come to regret their thoughtless actions. My name is Amber, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a single-parent household, just Mom and I. Dad passed away when I was very young, and I don't even remember his face. With no grandparents either, Mom is the only family I have. In my childhood memories, Mom was always busy, working day and night to raise me. When I was in elementary school, I would go to Mom's workplace every day after school. I'd sit in a corner, doing my homework or reading books I borrowed from the library, all while watching Mom work tirelessly. As I entered middle school, I became busy with club activities and stopped going to Mom's office after school. Now, all grown up, I work at the same company as Mom. Just the other day, I informed Mom that Orlando, my boyfriend of 3 years, and I had decided to get married. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes as she heard the news. When I shared the announcement at work, My colleagues who had known me since I was a child also became misty-eyed.
Little Amber has grown into such a fine young woman,
they said, their voices filled with emotion. Realizing how many people had been watching over me all these years, I felt a lump form in my throat, touched by their love and support. After discussing it with Orlando, we decided to forego a wedding ceremony and simply submit the necessary paperwork to officially tie the knot. This decision was heavily influenced by my mom. My mom is a frugal woman, and growing up, I watched and learned from her example. Naturally, I started to carefully consider the value and purpose of money. I thought Orlando and his parents might object to this idea, but to my surprise, they readily accepted it. Perhaps because they knew about my upbringing.
That sounds like a good idea. Besides, you can always have a wedding ceremony whenever you want. If you feel like having one later on, you can do it then,
they said. I feel truly blessed to have met such understanding people. There's just 1 week left until the date Orlando, and I decided to make it official. The reality of getting married and changing my last name is slowly sinking in. Mom must be feeling the same way. Out of the blue, Mom invited me to go out for dinner together. Mom is incredibly frugal and always busy, so we've rarely eaten out together before. I was thrilled by Mom's invitation and immediately accepted. When Mom asked what I wanted to eat, I told her I was in the mood for steak. She then made a reservation at a famous, high-end steakhouse that's frequently featured in the media. I was overjoyed to be dining out with Mom at a restaurant I would never normally go to. That day was supposed to be a memorable one in my life. Well, in a way, it did become an unforgettable day. Just not in the way I had imagined. My dinner date with Mom was on a weekday evening. Mom is always swamped with work, and that was the only day she could make time. But because it was a weekday, we were able to secure a reservation at the last minute. I decided to finish work on time and head to the restaurant, determined to enjoy myself to the fullest while still being mindful not to drink too much and affect my work the next day. Even on a weekday, the famous steakhouse had a line of customers outside, probably because it was dinner time. I had finished work a bit too early in my excitement, so there was still some time before our reservation. I messaged Mom to let her know I had already arrived and passed the time by scrolling through my phone. After a little while, I heard a commotion.
Excuse me, what do you mean we can't get a table? Do you know who I am? I'm Catherine Adinsel, and I work at Liberty Bank. How dare you refuse to seat me?
Startled by the voice, I looked up to find that the line of waiting customers had disappeared. Instead, there was a couple causing a scene with the restaurant staff right in front of the high-end steakhouse. The staff member was desperately trying to explain that they were fully booked for the evening with reservations, but the woman who introduced herself as Catherine wouldn't listen at all. She flashed an arrogant smirk and scoffed.
But there are empty tables right there. Just let us sit down. Don't you agree, Mason?
Catherine insisted. Yeah, that's right. If there are open seats, why can't we just sit there? Mason chimed in.
See, even Mason thinks so. Hurry up and show us to a table,
Catherine demanded, getting in the staff member's face with a triumphant look. The employee, clearly at a loss, repeatedly explained that those tables were reserved for other customers. It's astonishing how selfish some people can be. If they were so unwilling to wait, they should have made a reservation before coming. Instead, they're harassing the staff and making unreasonable demands, trying to get their way. Feeling sorry for the employee dealing with them, I turned my attention back to my phone. Just then, the phone in my hand vibrated. The screen displayed a notification for one new message. When I opened it, I saw that it was from Mom. Apparently, she had also finished work earlier than planned. The message was short, simply stating that she was on her way. About 15 minutes later, Mom arrived. At that point, Catherine was still yelling at the staff member, and even Mom was taken aback by the scene. Trying to change the mood, I made an effort to speak in a cheerful voice.
Hey Mom, you must be tired. Based on your outfit, I'm guessing you had a meeting with Luis?
Yes, that's right. Could you tell just by looking?
Well, of course. You've been wearing that suit for over a decade now, haven't you?
I teased, smirking at Mom's attire as she approached. The suit Mom was wearing today was the one I had gifted her 10 years ago when I graduated from high school. I had saved up money from part-time jobs to give it to her as a token of my gratitude for raising me all these years. Mom was overjoyed with the present, and even now, she often wears it on days when she doesn't have meetings. In fact, when meeting with people she knows well and who aren't particularly fussy about clothing, she'll even wear this suit to meetings. Luis is one of those people. Once, when he came to our company, he stopped by my desk while waiting for Mom. You know, your mom told me that you gave her that suit as a gift. She was so happy and proud when she mentioned it. You're lucky. My daughter only ever tells me that I stink or that I'm dirty whenever she sees my face. I wish she would learn from you, Amber. He complained. Chatting about that, Mom and I made our way to the restaurant entrance. As soon as the staff member saw Mom's face, they acknowledged her with a nod while still dealing with Catherine. The fact that they recognized who we were without even having to say our names made it clear that Mom must use this restaurant for business dinners too. Knowing that she had brought me to such a place made me even happier. Mom walked past Catherine and her companion, who were still arguing endlessly by the entrance, giving them a brief greeting as she passed. I tried to do the same, but Catherine pointed at us accusingly.
Hey, wait a minute! We got here first, so why are they trying to go in before us?
Those individuals have a reservation, the staff member explained.
Even if they have a reservation, we were waiting first, so it's only good manners for them to let us go ahead,
Mason retorted. Catherine and Mason glared at us with sharp, piercing eyes. The employee who had been dealing with Catherine all this time hastily called out to someone inside the restaurant. Catherine and her partner continued to stare at us intensely, still complaining non-stop. However, a male staff member quickly emerged from inside and stepped between me and Catherine. Taking advantage of that moment, a female employee who had rushed over led us to our table. The female staff member kept apologizing profusely, even though the restaurant had done nothing wrong. I reassured her that there was no issue, and when Mom asked if I was really okay, I smiled and told her everything was fine. From the moment I first saw them, I had thought they were the type to make terrible complaints, but I never imagined it would go this far. But now, I wouldn't have to interact with Catherine anymore. I decided to take it as a valuable experience and look at it positively. At that time, I believed I wouldn't have to deal with Catherine any further. We put the incident out of our minds and focused on enjoying our meal. As expected of a high-end steakhouse, I nervously opened the menu, worried about how expensive it might be, but the menu only listed photos and dish names without any prices.
Hey, Mom! There aren't any prices on the menu. Is this what they call market price at fancy restaurants?
When I asked Mom tentatively, she burst out laughing, apparently amused by my reaction. According to Mom, it's common at upscale restaurants used for business entertaining. Only the person footing the bill gets a menu with prices, while the guests' menus don't list the costs. It's a considerate gesture from the host, allowing the guests to eat and drink without worrying about the prices.
So you just order whatever you like, without worrying about a thing. Even if you eat until you're stuffed, I won't go bankrupt.
Mom said, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes from laughing so hard. I puffed out my cheeks at her, pretending to be annoyed. She didn't have to laugh that much just because I was a little concerned about her wallet. Well, if she insisted, I wouldn't hold back. I ordered a course with a cut of meat I'd only ever heard of called Chateaubriand, along with a drink. Mom ordered the same, and while we waited for our beverages to arrive, I looked around the restaurant. As expected of a high-end establishment, the decor was sophisticated and refined. The restaurant had both private rooms and table seating, and we were shown to a table. The table next to ours seemed to have just finished their meal, with no customers in sight and a server clearing away the dishes. As I watched, I felt a slight sense of foreboding. Just then, our drinks arrived, and as if to shake off the premonition that had crossed my mind, I clinked glasses with Mom and took a sip. While Mom and I were engaged in casual conversation, the voice I had heard at the entrance rang out again.
Hey, aren't those the rude mother and daughter who cut in line in front of us earlier? Change our table. I can't eat next to people like that. I apologize, ma'am. Unfortunately, we're fully booked today, and this is the only table available. What? Ugh, forget it.
Catherine sat down forcefully in her chair, fuming with anger. Mason glared at us too. The two of them wore thoroughly disgusted expressions as they waved the server away. It was their own fault for not making a reservation, yet they had the audacity to act this way. What's more, they made it sound like we were the ones in the wrong. I had been looking forward to a pleasant meal out with Mom, but thanks to Catherine and her companion, my mood had soured.
Amber, congratulations on your wedding. You've grown into such a fine young woman. I'm so happy for you,
Mom said, as if trying to change the subject and lift my spirits. At her words, I decided to focus on enjoying this time with just Mom and I, without letting Catherine and the man get to me. But even then, Catherine couldn't resist making more cruel remarks. Marriage? These days, getting married isn't the end goal, so I don't know what she's talking about. Well, unlike me, an elite employee at Liberty Bank, they look poor. I guess their only chance at a big break is to aim for a rich spouse.
True. They clearly don't seem like they'd be good at their jobs. I mean, they can't even do something as simple as wait their turn in line.
Catherine and Mason were looking at their menus, but they kept glancing our way and saying those things loud enough for us to hear. I was dumbfounded by their unbelievably rude behavior. Mom also seemed a bit irritated and started speaking in a lowered voice. Not getting angry was the mature way to handle it, I suppose. This was one of the things I admired about Mom. Now Catherine and the others shouldn't be able to hear our conversation. We could enjoy chatting, just the two of us, without them butting in awkwardly. Or so I thought, but Catherine and her friend were even more inconsiderate than I had imagined.
But seriously, look at what they're wearing. This is a high-end steakhouse. Those aren't the kind of clothes you wear here. Do they not understand the concept of dressing appropriately for the occasion? What are they thinking?
Hey, don't be so hard on them. They probably tried their best to wear a suit since they were coming to a fancy restaurant. Look at that old suit. I bet coming here took everything they had, and they couldn't afford to spend money on clothes.
Ah, I see. You can tell they're poor just by looking at their faces. So this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime splurge for them. I couldn't bear to live like that.
Once they realized they couldn't hear our conversation anymore, Catherine and her companion started loudly insulting Mom and I. Even when the server told them to keep their voices down because they were disturbing other customers, they didn't listen at all. Catherine and Mason kept making disparaging remarks about Mom's outfit, my hairstyle, and all sorts of other things. When the server came over to give them another warning, I quietly asked if we could move to a different table. The server looked extremely apologetic as they lowered their voice and informed me that the restaurant was still fully booked. It seemed like no tables would be opening up anytime soon. With no other choice, we had to continue our meal while pretending we couldn't hear them. However, our attitude seemed to irritate Catherine even more. She took an unbelievable course of action. It was about 20 minutes after we started ignoring Catherine's insults. The main course steaks were brought to our table. The Chateaubriand, which I was trying for the first time, was incredibly tender yet not greasy at all. It tasted so good that I felt like I could easily have seconds. Mom and I were joking that it would have been even more delicious if Catherine and the man weren't sitting next to us when suddenly something flew over from the neighboring table, and Mom abruptly clutched her neck.
Ow! Mom, what's wrong?
At Mom's scream, the restaurant instantly fell into chaos. Thinking she might have touched the hot plate, servers rushed over with wet towels and ice. Mom was writhing in pain from the heat, struggling to get something out from inside her suit. Eventually, something fell out of Mom's clothes. It was a piece of meat, still steaming. It seemed that someone had deliberately pressed it against the pellet at the edge of the hot plate to make it scorching hot. Parts of it were charred. I stared at the meat in shock, unable to comprehend why it had come out of Mom's clothes. Mom was cooling her neck with a towel she had received from a server. Through the gaps in the towel, I could see that her skin was bright red and swollen, clearly burnt. Pointing at Mom in that state, Catherine and Mason were laughing hysterically. There was no doubt about it, this was Catherine's doing.
What did you do to my mom?
No need to get so angry. I was just treating a poor person to some steak. Catherine showed no remorse whatsoever. Mason nodded repeatedly, as if agreeing with her. Shaking with rage, I managed to squeeze out some words.
What if Mom gets hurt because of what you did?
Like I care.
It's your own fault for coming to a restaurant where you don't belong in the first place.
Catherine continued to insult us with a malicious grin on her face, showing no signs of remorse. I tilted my head, completely unable to comprehend what she was saying. Seeing me like that, Catherine shrugged in exasperation. As for Mason, he even had the nerve to say, "Not only are they poor, but they're stupid too."
I guess I have no choice. I'll spell it out so even an idiot like you can understand,
Catherine said, fixing me with a contemptuous gaze. Then, with a mocking tone, she declared, "Having poor people around ruins the taste of the food. Go home." Catherine's lips curled into an ugly sneer, her face twisting with a hideous smile. Mason laughed along with her, nodding repeatedly. I couldn't believe that such inconsiderate people existed in this world. As I opened my mouth to argue, Mom stopped me with her hand. Her face was etched with barely concealed anger.
You said you work at Liberty Bank, right?
Huh? What does that have to do with anything right now? Catherine continued to laugh eerily while taunting Mom in a condescending manner. To Catherine, Mom solemnly commanded,
"Go get your president right now." What?
At Mom's words, Catherine stared at her, dumbfounded. Mason wore the same expression as Catherine. Oh no, it's over. I thought to myself. They had managed to infuriate my usually gentle mom to this extent. There was no way they were going to get off easy. Now, they would come to regret their outrageous behavior. At Mom's statement, the restaurant fell as silent as a grave. At that moment, the restaurant manager, who had finally noticed the commotion, emerged from the back. The manager attempted to guide us to the employee break room, suggesting we discuss the matter there calmly. We were still in the middle of our meal, but we couldn't cause any further disturbance to the restaurant. Mom and I were about to obediently follow the manager, but as expected, Catherine and her companion objected.
No way! Why should I have to go to some break room? Yeah, we're still in the middle of eating. This is ridiculous.
I couldn't help but sigh at the two of them making such a fuss. We were in the middle of our meal too. Moreover, while it was their own fault, we were completely innocent victims in this situation. We had come to eat here, paying a high price, thinking it would be an enjoyable dining experience. Why did we have to put up with this? As I thought about it, anger gradually welled up inside me.
So you two are saying you don't want to go to the restaurant's break room, is that right? That's what I'm saying! You can't even understand that? Are you stupid?
I had tried to confirm one last time, but Catherine just kept talking tough. If that was the case, there was no helping it. We couldn't make any more of a scene here and subject other customers to the same unpleasant feelings we were experiencing. I took out my smartphone and dialed a certain number. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered the phone.
Hello? It's rare that you call me, Amber. I was just with your mom a little while ago. I heard you two were going out to dinner tonight to celebrate your wedding. So what's up?
Luis spoke to me in his usual friendly manner. I explained the current situation to him. As he listened to my story, Luis's voice grew more and more serious. Upon hearing that Catherine and Mason were reluctant to move to the restaurant's break room, Luis asked me to put them on the phone. I silently held out the phone to Catherine, prompting her to take the call.
What do you want? Who are you? I'm busy right now. What? Mr. President, is this really you? Why would the president be calling these poor people?
Catherine seemed quite surprised by Luis's voice and was bombarding him with questions in her agitation. Then, Luis's angry voice rained down on Catherine. I couldn't make out exactly what he was saying since the phone wasn't on speaker, but from the tone of his voice that I could overhear, there was no doubt he was furious.
Yes. Yes. I understand. Yes, sir.
Hey, was that the president on the phone? Why the hell is the president calling that poor person?
How should I know?
As soon as the call ended, Mason started grilling Catherine. However, Catherine was just as clueless about the situation and merely yelled back at him. Seriously, even after having Luis talk to them, they were still being this loud and disruptive. What a nuisance these people were.
So, what did Luis say?
He said to bring you two along and come back to the main branch right away with Mason.
Well, that's to be expected, isn't it?
I nodded in agreement. Luis was an adorable, easygoing person who disliked stuffy formalities. If you didn't know, you'd never guess he was a man who had climbed the ranks to become the president of a bank with such a stodgy image. When Mom first introduced me to him, I thought it was some kind of joke. But he was by no means lacking in common sense, and he was a kind-hearted person who enjoyed taking care of others. When he heard I was getting married, he insisted on sending a gift no matter what. According to Luis, this wasn't a gift from the president of Liberty Bank, but something he personally wanted to give as an individual named Luis, so he wanted me to accept it without hesitation. There was no way a person like that would allow his subordinates to cause a huge ruckus in a restaurant and ruin someone else's special day.
Come on, let's get going then. Or are you still going to finish your meal? If so, I'll let Luis know you said you'd come after you're done with your course.
At my words, Catherine ground her teeth. The look on her face as she bit her lip was so vexed that just seeing it lifted my spirits.
I'll go. Jeez.
Seriously, what the hell is going on? Someone explain it to me properly. Catherine spoke in a sulky manner, as if spitting out the words. Mason, perhaps lacking the same resolve as Catherine, was looking back and forth between Mom and me with a pale face. I smiled at the two of them. It served them right to be cowering in fear, not understanding the situation. Today, we had to endure nearly 2 hours of unpleasantness because of Catherine and her companion. It wasn't wrong to get back at them a little like this. After settling the bill, we left the restaurant and headed for Liberty Bank's main branch. The main branch of Liberty Bank was about a 10-minute walk from the high-end steakhouse where we had been dining. We walked to Liberty Bank's main branch in silence. When we arrived at Liberty Bank, Luis was standing in front of the employee entrance. The Luis I knew always had a playful grin on his face, but today, he wore an expressionless mask, as if suppressing his anger. We entered through the employee entrance and were shown to a reception room. Coffee that Luis had personally brewed was placed in front of Mom and I. Catherine and Mason had the nerve to say they would make some themselves, but they were quickly shut down and told to stand there quietly. After Mom and I had taken a sip of coffee and caught our breath, Luis bowed deeply in apology. "I sincerely apologize for the inexcusable behavior of my subordinates."
Wait just a minute. This is a misunderstanding. In the first place, those poor people. That's enough. Do you have any idea who these individuals are? If you can't say anything but rude remarks, then keep your mouth shut. Mr. President, who exactly are these people?
Luis reprimanded Catherine, who had tried to confront the president. The intensity of his rebuke was so great that even Catherine fell silent involuntarily. In place of the now silent Catherine, Mason timidly spoke up. At his words, Luis held his head as if he had a headache.
That's where we're starting from. Why aren't you familiar with our bank's major clients? I told you to be sure to review the information so you wouldn't commit any faux pas.
Luis muttered as if groaning, still holding his forehead. However, he seemed to quickly compose himself and introduced us to the two of them.
This is the president of Apex Builders Company, Limited, and her daughter. They are major clients of our bank and were even involved in the construction of this main branch.
At Luis's explanation, Catherine and Mason couldn't hide their astonishment. Just as Luis said, Mom is the president of Apex Builders Company, Ltd. Originally, Dad had served as the president, but after he passed away, Mom took over. Mom had no knowledge of construction operations, but she had been supporting the company by handling all the general administrative tasks since Dad was president. Therefore, after Dad's passing, Mom was able to take over the company without any major issues. After Mom became president, she hired employees to serve as on-site supervisors and handle paperwork. Thanks to that, the skilled workers could concentrate on their on-site jobs, and the supervisors could focus on managing the sites, improving the quality of their work. Their meticulous workmanship gained a reputation, and the company continued to grow.
What? This person is the president? No way, she's wearing such an old suit. There's no way someone like that could be the president. Even if you try to deceive me along with my president, it won't work. You see, this suit was a gift from my daughter 10 years ago. She saved up money from her part-time job to buy it for me. It's incredibly precious to me. I had been taking good care of it, and yet you had the audacity to throw a stake at it.
Mom glared at Catherine and Mason with a stern gaze. Mason trembled under her stare.
I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were Ms. Roger. I have committed a grave offense.
Mason continued to apologize with a pale face. His sudden change in demeanor was so drastic that I couldn't help but laugh.
Is that all? I am truly sorry about the precious suit as well. Please allow me to pay for the dry cleaning.
Sternly reprimanded by Luis, Mason began to break out in a cold sweat, his face still pale. It was a truly pitiful sight. Watching this scene unfold, Catherine burst out laughing.
Mason, what are you doing? You look so uncool. I don't care if it's uncool. Catherine, you need to apologize too, right now. Huh? Why should I have to apologize to these people? Even if you say they're major clients, they're still just one of many clients in the end. There's no reason for me to apologize. Did you seriously not look at the list of major clients? Just apologize already, come on.
Mason moved to Catherine's side and placed his hand on her back, trying to force her to bow her head. An apology like that held no meaning, but I could tell that Mason was doing this out of concern for Catherine in his own way. However, Catherine seemed unable to understand. She roughly brushed off Mason's hand that was placed on her back.
Stop it. Pressuring a girl like this, you're the worst. I never thought you were this kind of person. What's with that tone? I'm just worried about you. Don't blame me for what happens.
Catherine and Mason began arguing, forgetting about the three of us present. They were truly hopeless individuals. I cleared my throat to get their attention.
So, you have no intention of apologizing to us after all, is that correct? Of course not. I'm not the one in the wrong here.
Catherine said it with her chest puffed out, seemingly truly believing her own words. I shrugged at her statement. Earlier, I had given her a chance, but because she stubbornly refused, it ended up reaching Luis's ears. Now, I had given her another chance, but it seemed Catherine had learned nothing from the previous incident. Well, I guess it can't be helped then. I let out a deep sigh. Then, I turned my gaze towards Mom. Mom, sensing what I was about to say, nodded in acknowledgement. With that, I declared, "In that case, we will be withdrawing the $100 million our company has deposited with this bank."
What? $100 million? There's no way poor people like you have that kind of money. There are a lot of things I'd like to retort to, but first of all, neither Mom nor I are poor. She has used this suit for a long time because it's truly precious to her, and we save money for times when we really need it because we don't believe that spending money thoughtlessly on luxuries equates to happiness. Talk is cheap. Anyone can say whatever they want.
Catherine seemed determined not to change her preconceived notions. Exasperated, I operated my smartphone and opened the online banking screen for Liberty Bank. What was displayed was my personal account. I silently showed Catherine the balance displayed there. The figure $100,000 was shown. The life insurance that Dad had left for me in case of an emergency had been deposited directly. He had always told Mom that if anything happened to him, he wanted me to use this money to go to school. Incidentally, Mom had also received a separate life insurance payout for mine. I didn't know the exact amount, but apparently, it was enough that she wouldn't have to worry about our future living expenses. The first time I heard that story, I couldn't help but cry, realizing that Dad had truly cared about us deeply.
What? This amount? What? Are you two really not poor?
In response to Catherine's words, I smiled instead of answering. Catherine's complexion visibly worsened. In the meantime, I further operated my smartphone and opened our company's website this time. When I tapped on the CEO's greeting page, Mom's photo, name, and the title of Representative Director and President were displayed next to the greeting text. Seeing that screen, Catherine let out a scream-like voice.
No way, that's not the poor woman from earlier. What? So the part about being the president is true too? Then the $100 million mentioned earlier isn't a lie either? It's true! The company name and deposit amount are also listed on the major client list. That's why I told you to apologize quickly.
Placing his hand on the shoulder of the agitated Catherine, Mason urged her to apologize. Catherine looked at Mason and finally uttered an apology.
I'm sorry. If you had apologized earlier, it wouldn't have come to this. We've really been indebted to Luis, And Mom and I have talked about how we enjoy talking with him and want to continue our long-standing relationship. But I can no longer trust a bank where such inconsiderate people work.
I feel the same way. I conveyed my true feelings to Luis. Mom also agreed with my opinion. Luis nodded deeply in understanding at our words. It's only natural for you to feel that way. I apologize for not thoroughly educating my subordinates. They were well behaved within the company, but to think they were doing such things outside. I guess I'm not a good judge of character. Luis bowed deeply to Mom and I. His expression was so genuinely apologetic that it was clear he was sincerely sorry. There was even a sense of sorrow in his final mutter. However, that moment was fleeting, and Luis looked at Catherine with the face of a bank president.
Now that the situation has escalated to this point, I must make a decision as the president. You understand that, don't you?
Luis addressed Catherine and Mason. The two had pale faces and seemed unable to speak due to their anxiety.
Catherine Adinsel, because of your words and actions, our bank is on the verge of losing a major client. Moreover, I cannot trust someone who insults customers by calling them poor. Continuing to employ you would be an act of reducing our bank's clientele. Therefore, by my authority as president, I am terminating your employment.
Luis solemnly declared this to Catherine. Shocked, Catherine sank to the floor.
And Mason Ashworth, your words and actions were also problematic, just like Catherine's, but you showed willingness to apologize and seemed to be reflecting on your behavior. However, there are far too many issues with your conduct and character. Therefore, you will be demoted to a regular employee and transferred to a rural branch. You will not engage in any customer-facing duties such as sales or front desk work, and will only be assigned to back-office tasks.
Although Mason avoided being fired, his complexion was extremely poor. I don't know much about banking, but having one's job responsibilities restricted is generally considered a sign of incompetence. It must be a quite painful punishment for Mason.
I'm being fired. Wait, if I'm fired, how am I supposed to make a living starting tomorrow? Please, I'll apologize, so forgive me.
Sitting on the floor, Catherine clung to my feet. Strangely, I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity for her. So, I smiled at Catherine.
You seem to enjoy quite a luxurious lifestyle, so it's going to be tough starting tomorrow, isn't it? Didn't you say you couldn't bear a life where you couldn't eat high-end steaks? I guess you might have to do some grueling work just to eat.
At my words, Catherine's face contorted in despair. Mason, still pale-faced, kept his head down and said nothing. Leaving the two of them behind, Mom and I were seen off by Luis and headed home. It seems Luis truly followed through on his words, and Catherine was officially fired afterward. Given the reason for her dismissal, even her parents were exasperated and cut ties with her, and she was kicked out of the family home where she had been living. Apparently, Catherine had quite a spending habit and had no savings. Unable to afford an apartment, she's been staying in cheap motels. Even when she tries to job hunt, she can't pass the document screening because she has no address. In the meantime, her meager savings ran out, and she's now working grueling manual labor jobs that anyone can get hired for just to earn money for the day. That day, Mom was injured when Catherine threw the steak at her, so we went to the hospital and got a medical certificate. We plan to file a damage report, so she will likely be arrested for assault in the near future. As for Mason, he was demoted to a regular employee, had his job responsibilities restricted, and was sent to a rural area. He endured and worked there for a few months, but perhaps his pride couldn't take it, and he voluntarily resigned. He was determined to climb even higher, but it seems Luis has informed the industry about this incident, so his prospects for re-employment in the financial sector are quite grim. Well, I'm truly sorry about what happened this time. After updating us on what happened to Catherine and Mason, Luis apologized again. In the end, we decided to cancel our plan to withdraw $100 million from Liberty Bank. The problematic individuals, Catherine and Mason, were gone, and aside from incidents involving those two, we had never had any unpleasant experiences at Liberty Bank. On the contrary, Luis had always treated us exceptionally well. Both Mom and I felt it would be a shame to sever this connection just like that.
Now order whatever you like today. As an apology and a celebration for Amber, I'm treating you to anything you want.
And so, today, Luis, Mom, and I are at the high-end steakhouse we visited the other day. It's a do-over of the celebration. Speaking in a joking tone, Luis narrowed his eyes and gave us an awkward wink. He had completely returned to his usual self.
Are you sure? In that case, I might just eat like 3 plates of Chateaubriand.
Maybe I should open the most expensive bottle of wine.
Please, go easy on this old man's wallet so I don't go bankrupt.
Luis let out a pitiful voice, a far cry from his earlier bravado. It was so funny that Mom and I burst into laughter. I'm truly happy that we could return to this kind of relationship. Although my environment will change once I get married, I want to continue weaving such joyful days in the new life I'm about to embark on. My husband, Carl, and I met back in our college days. We were in the same faculty, so we often had classes together and knew of each other. However, we didn't actively engage in conversation, we were merely acquaintances. But one day, Carl started talking to me more often. At first, it was about wanting to copy notes or needing help with something from class, but gradually he began to bring up more personal topics, like what I did on weekends or what my hobbies were. As we continued to interact, we grew closer. Eventually, we became a couple. Spending more time together, I was happy to learn things about Carl. His hobbies, favorite foods and music genres, and even his favorite spots for a nap. Time passed, and we graduated from college. Carl and I each entered the companies where we had received job offers. We saw each other less until our work schedules settled down, which took about half a year. Once we could meet up more frequently, we started visiting tourist spots and spending time at home like we did in our college days. 3 years after graduation, Carl proposed, and we got married. Being a dual-income household, we decided to divide the household chores. Carl wasn't fond of cooking, so I took on all things related to meals, and he handled cleaning and laundry. Our relationship was great. I was so happy we could support each other in our lives, and I often thought how fortunate I was to have married such a wonderful man. At the same time, I hoped this life would continue forever. However, a few years later, our relationship took an unexpected turn. 3 years into our marriage, I was offered a department transfer. It would be busier, but with a higher salary and a chance for career advancement. When I told Carl, he was as happy for me as if it were his own news.
That's great. I'm so happy for you. Really?
Yes. It'll be busy, right? I can't cook, but leave the house stuff to me and focus on your work.
Thank you.
Carl seemed interested in my new department and threw a variety of questions my way, like, what kind of work will you do there? And, what kind of people are in that department? Not only did I appreciate Carl's understanding of my job, but I was also touched by his interest in it. A month later, I was working in my newly assigned department. There was a lot to learn on top of a hefty workload, and I was incredibly busy. It was busier than I had anticipated, and it was wearing me down mentally. However, a year after the department transfer, I had fully adapted to the new job and environment, regaining the leisurely lifestyle I once had. Work remained busy, but it was manageable once I got used to it. I started to take on business trips and became even more dedicated to my job. However, it's true that the time I could spend at home decreased, and I felt lonely. Perhaps sensing how I felt, Carl began to say more often, "Work hard, but don't overdo it." His words became a source of support for me. But 2 years after my department transfer, I noticed Carl acting suspiciously. By this time, I had to travel more frequently for work, leaving the house empty more often. I was filled with guilt towards Carl. Yet, Carl would kindly say, "It's work, it can't be helped." I took his kindness for granted, and I let my guard down completely. One day, after finishing work at a business trip location, I called Carl and noticed something odd about him over the phone. He seemed overly flustered and was breathing heavily.
What's wrong? You're breathing heavily, aren't you?
Breathing heavily. No, I'm not, really.
Come on, you are. Are you in the middle of something? I can hang up if you are.
Yeah. It's something like that. I'll call you back later.
Hey, wait.
With that, Carl abruptly hung up the phone. Calling Carl after finishing work on a business trip wasn't unusual. I'd call just wanting to hear his voice, with no particular reason. Carl would do the same, and it had become a norm between us. Maybe the timing was just bad that day. I thought so, but the next day and the day after that, Carl's behavior remained unchanged. It seemed like he found calls from me bothersome. What's up? You don't need anything? I'll call you back, then. Bye. He kept saying he would call back, but he never did. I also noticed that his replies to my texts were unusually slow, and the fact that he stopped initiating contact worried me. At this point, I began to suspect Carl was hiding something from me. Even when I returned home, something was off. It felt cold, or maybe indifferent, something like that.
Oh, Betty, you're back.
Yeah. Finished earlier than I thought.
Is that so?
Being treated coldly in my own home made it difficult to relax and recover from work fatigue.
Hey, have you been cold to me lately? Is something wrong?
Eh? Really? I don't think so. I didn't like being treated this way every time I came back from a business trip. I bravely asked Carl about the reason for his cold behavior, but he just kept dodging the question, and I couldn't get the answer I was looking for.
Really? You're not hiding anything?
I'm not hiding anything.
I see.
Seeing Carl's bewildered look, I wondered if he hadn't even realized his behavior had changed. Regardless of the circumstances, my suspicions about Carl only grew. At this point, it was clear that Carl was hiding something, and as days passed, what he was hiding became increasingly apparent. Carl was having an affair. I noticed the position of the dishes had drastically changed when I tried to cook. Carl was supposed to eat out or get food from the grocery store while I was away on business, as he never cooked. Hey, did you start cooking?
Why?
Thinking maybe he had taken an interest in cooking, I asked him about it. However, Carl just showed confusion and didn't answer my question. Just curious. I noticed the dishes were moved, so I thought maybe you cooked.
Oh, I see. That's what this is about. Yeah, I figured too much eating out isn't good for my health.
Really? What did you cook?
Stew, I think.
This conversation led me to suspect that Carl might be cheating. If it were merely a change of heart, it would be a different story, but Carl was never the type to cook. I had suggested cooking to him before, especially when I was away, to avoid eating out too much. But Carl always insisted. There's no way I can do it. And it's fine if I only eat out. In fact, there were other things that concerned me besides the dish arrangement. Particularly, how unusually tidy the room was. Sure, Carl was in charge of cleaning, but even considering that, it felt too neat. Thinking that Carl might have brought his affair partner home made everything make sense. I wanted to confirm my suspicions about the affair quickly, so I started snooping around Carl's belongings. That said, I didn't immediately hire a detective or follow him myself. I thought the quickest and easiest way to find evidence of his affair was to look through Carl's smartphone. If I couldn't find anything conclusive, then so be it. I managed to unlock Carl's smartphone using his fingerprint while he was asleep. Bringing Carl's smartphone into my room, I looked for any suspicious women. Surprisingly, I quickly found a woman who appeared to be his affair partner, but then I was hit by a wave of confusion. Because the woman was someone I knew. Her name was Essie. Essie was a college classmate of mine, someone I occasionally talked to. It seemed she and Carl were in the same club, and I remembered seeing her often in the club photos Carl showed me. Looking through the exchanges between Essie and Carl, it became clear their relationship started about a year ago at a club gathering. They had been communicating daily since that day and started dating a month after the gathering ended. It seemed Essie was also married, and initially, she and Carl had their secret meetings in hotels, but then Carl started bringing her to our house. From then on, our home became the go-to place for their rendezvous whenever I was away. I managed to steady my trembling hands enough to take photos of their entire conversation and transferred them to my computer. Then, I carefully placed Carl's smartphone back where I found it. Though I was glad to have confirmed the affair, knowing the other person was an acquaintance dealt its own blow. However, that feeling gradually turned into anger. Deciding on divorce the moment the affair was confirmed felt too easy and unsatisfying, almost like letting them off the hook. Determined to make Carl and Essie pay, I immediately started plotting. After becoming sure of Carl's affair, I became more observant of things like the position of dishes and cleaning supplies. I also started paying attention to the amount of my cosmetics and shampoo being used. Seeing my seldom used toner depleted, I knew Essie had been using it without permission, which made my anger boil. When I noticed a significant amount of my expensive serum was gone, I couldn't help but let out a huge sigh of frustration. "Hey, you started doing skincare? That's surprisingly unlike you."
Skincare? Why? Was something used?
"No, just. Your skin seemed in good condition recently."
Oh, I see.
Talking to Carl about it was entertaining, even knowing he might realize I was onto him. His panicked expression was amusing, almost blatantly saying he was hiding something. Maybe I was toying with Carl to keep some sense of control. Carl never tried to erase any trace of Essie, though a little caution could have spared him. Instead, I felt Essie's presence more strongly. Leaving signs of cooking or finding hairs that belonged to neither Carl nor me in the bathroom made me doubt their effort to hide the affair. I documented all potential evidence in photos and saved them on my computer. Carl often didn't answer my calls when I was on business trips, and his replies to my texts were unusually slow. I got into the habit of assuming he was with Essie at home during those times, feeling miserable each time. After a year of living this way, I finally had everything ready and decided to execute my long-planned revenge. Next week, I have to go on a business trip for a couple of days again. Sorry to leave you alone.
Oh, is that so? Do your best. Don't worry about me.
When I mentioned the business trip, Carl seemed slightly happier. Maybe because he and Essie always met when I was away. In other words, they made sure not to meet any other time. That's why Carl was probably looking forward to my business trips more than anyone else. Are you sure? Won't you get lonely? What are you talking about? Hey, shouldn't you be preparing for your trip? Though I had no feelings left for Carl, I couldn't help but think he should at least pretend to be sad about it. I then pretended to prepare for the trip as Carl had suggested. Actually, going on a business trip was a lie. The days I told Carl I would be away were actually when I planned to work remotely. If Carl thought I was not home, there was a very high chance he would bring Essie over for their secret rendezvous. My idea of revenge was to burst in on them when they were in the midst of enjoying themselves and confront them with a divorce. I wondered if there was anything more I could do, but this plan seemed the most straightforward. On the day, I left the house with my large carry-on bag as I usually would when going on a business trip. See you in 2 days then.
Yeah.
Carl seemed quite restless, probably excited to see Essie. Essie's arrival time was predictable. On Carl's workdays, it was 7 p.m., and on his days off, it was 10 a.m. That day was Carl's day off, so she would likely arrive around 10 a.m. After working at a cafe until the expected time, I returned home, wondering if Essie had arrived. I quietly entered the house and unlocked the door. Right inside, I found a coat strewn about that I would never wear. I immediately knew it was Essie's and was secretly pleased my suspicion was correct. Then, I stealthily returned to my room and continued my remote work.
This is amazing. I'm so glad Betty has so many business trips. Yeah. I'm happy we get to meet so much.
Nobody suspects a thing, and it's the perfect spot. The next room was Carl's. Listening in, I could hear Carl and Essie happily chatting away.
How come Betty hasn't noticed anything?
I would definitely notice if it were me. But it's because Betty is oblivious that we can meet like this, right?
Well, that's true.
I thought to myself, who's the oblivious one here, as I continued to listen. Despite being the subject of their mockery, I didn't feel angry. Probably too tense for any other emotion to surface. In a few minutes, their conversation dwindled. And in its place came the sound of rustling sheets and more intimate noises. I wanted to cover my ears but resisted. Minutes later, I heard their heavy breathing and knew their act was over. This was my moment, so I entered the next room.
Hey! Betty! Why are you here? Wait, what?
The moment they saw me, Carl was shocked, and Essie screamed, frantically trying to cover herself.
Seems like you were having a good time. How long have you been here? Wait, why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be on a business trip?
That was a lie. I knew you two were having an affair, so I thought I'd catch you in the act.
No way. You said she hadn't noticed. That's what I thought.
I heard everything you said earlier. Talking about me being oblivious and all that.
Wait, so you knew from there?
I heard everything you two were doing. The moment I said that, I could see both of their faces turn pale. First off, get dressed quickly. Another guest is coming, and we'll discuss the details then.
A guest?
Who do you think? It seemed Essie knew. But she probably didn't want to believe her guess and asked me anyway. You know, don't you? You probably at least have a guess.
Anthony. Correct. I also called Anthony.
Anthony is Essie's husband and was in the same college year as Carl and me. When I found out Carl's affair partner was the married Essie, I asked a friend who was close to Essie. That's how I quickly learned that Anthony was her husband. Along those lines, I told the friend about the situation, got Anthony's contact information, and got in touch with him. After telling Anthony about Essie's affair, his lack of surprise was striking. However, unexpectedly, when I mentioned wanting revenge, he agreed to join in. So, she really was doing it. I'm surprised it's with him, though. Did you know she was cheating?
Kind of. I was thinking it was about time to do something about it. I'll help you, Betty. I've got a lot I want to say to Essie too.
Watching them hurriedly get dressed, I remembered the conversation I had with Anthony. Neither Carl nor Essie attempted to flee. Once dressed, they quietly waited for Anthony to arrive. A few minutes later, the sound of the door opening signaled Anthony's entry, as I had left it unlocked for him. I had informed Anthony about the plan and the timing, so I felt relieved that things would proceed smoothly.
Essie, what the hell are you doing? Anthony!
Well, this is,
I'm not asking you. I'm asking Essie.
Anthony seemed angrier than I expected. With visible anger, he pressed Essie for answers. Overwhelmed by his intensity, Essie couldn't speak, but Anthony kept on pressing.
I've been having an affair.
Since when?
Over a year ago. It started with that club gathering, didn't it? Yeah.
Essie looked at Anthony as if wondering how he knew all this.
You're too obvious. Coming home wearing men's perfume, suddenly changing your taste in clothes. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I'm really underestimated here. Please. What do you mean, please? It's over. If you like that guy so much, why don't you marry him? Hey, why does it sound like I'm getting divorced too? Betty hasn't said anything.
To think they believed divorce could still be avoided under these circumstances was astonishing.
Well, I was actually thinking I do want a divorce. If I didn't want to, why would I go through all this trouble? You're kidding, right? As if I'd lie about this. I'm divorcing you. And I'll be taking alimony from the divorce court. From Essie, too, of course. Me too. I'll also be claiming compensation from both of you through the divorce court.
Faced with divorce, the two continued to resist. It seemed less that they were opposed to divorce and more that they didn't want to pay the compensation a court might order.
Please, let's start over. It's definitely better that way. Don't you think so, Essie?
I do think so. I want to start over. Please. Their refusal didn't change anything. I pulled out my smartphone and showed them some of the evidence.
Why do you have that? Why do you think? Just so you know, I have a lot more evidence. You can refuse all you want, but it won't change the facts, and it won't change my mind or Anthony's.
When I threatened to show more evidence, Essie cried out.
Look, maybe we did something wrong, but do you really have to do this? Keeping evidence on your smartphone, it's creepy.
What you two did is far creepier.
Exactly. Fine. We'll divorce. Hey, why don't we live together? We'll definitely be happier. Think about it. They trapped us, you know. Can you really live with someone like that?
Hearing Essie's words, Carl seemed to make up his mind.
Yeah, you're right.
Fine, if you want a divorce, I'll give you one.
Really? Then sign the divorce papers, please. Give it here. Right, living with someone you can't trust. That's right. So creepy.
While complaining, Carl and Essie both signed their respective divorce papers.
Here, happy now? I've signed too. Finally, we can go our separate ways.
Thank you.
Just so you know, I'll be claiming compensation through the divorce court, so don't run away. Of course. Anyway, I'm glad. Now you can't waste all my money. What are you talking about? You hardly make any money.
Oh, did I not tell you?
I've been offered a promotion. My salary's going up.
If it were you, you'd just blow it all away, so it's good we're divorcing before that happens.
Wait, what?
Essie seemed unaware of Anthony's impending promotion. Following that, I also informed Carl of my situation. Actually, I've been offered a promotion too. It's good I worked hard while you were messing around.
You too?
Yes. And my salary is going to increase quite a bit. But it's none of your concern anymore. Hearing about our promotions, Carl and Essie's previously defiant attitude began to crumble.
Maybe we can cancel the divorce? I can change. Please?
Me too. I'll do more around the house and stop wasting money. Please, can't we? At this point, it was clear they were only interested in the money. Who do you think is going to redo this? You really have a convenient way of thinking.
I'm really glad I divorced you. It's all about the money for you, isn't it? If you want to spend so much money, earn it yourself by working. Got it? Come on, give me another chance.
Please. In the end, they kept refusing, but our minds were made up. After submitting the divorce papers, the divorce was finalized. During the negotiations for the compensation owed due to the divorce, it turned out they really didn't have much money. But that was irrelevant to me. I made sure to claim a fair amount. I've moved to a new house and am enjoying a comfortable life on my own. A friend who gave me Anthony's contact told me that Carl and Essie ended up splitting. They also said they saw a haggard Carl at the grocery store. So far, there have been no sightings of Essie. Being divorced from Carl has allowed me to focus more on my work, making every day enjoyable. Indeed, cheating is wrong. I'm part of this local organic extracurricular group. It's not like we're hardcore about only choosing organic or believing macrobiotic is the ultimate truth. It's more about gently encouraging each other to live a healthier and more natural lifestyle. We gather about twice a month, exchange information while chatting, and sometimes, if the organizer feels like it, they'll invite some expert to give a lecture. Anyway, it's all pretty laid back. I figured it was about time I started taking care of my health, now that I'm over 30. That's how I got into it, out of curiosity. Because the group wasn't too serious, I was able to join with a try-it-out attitude. But once I got into it, I found that natural foods have quite the depth and are interesting. Once I start something, I dive deep into it. Buying stuff is fine, but wouldn't it be even better to grow it yourself? So, I started a home garden. A kind person from the group shared some seeds and good soil with me, and I've been growing them without any pesticides or fertilizers. It's tough, but vegetables grown fully in nature are just so delicious. Since joining the group, Keely has been enjoying this surprisingly fun natural food lifestyle. As I got more familiar with the people around me, I began to notice something. It seems there's a faker among us in the group. I've been living this natural food lifestyle for about 2 years now. I've made friends of my age in the group. Me, Stacy, Madeline, and Anthonia. After we got close, we started having lunch together besides our activity days. But then, I noticed something. Among our group of friends, there's a pseudo-natural person. So, here's a quiz for you all of a sudden. Who is the faker? A conversation one day. I recommend that shop. They sell organic vegetables, various condiments, and even sweets, and they're all really delicious. Oh? Can you buy me something from there next time? I'd like to try it too. I heard about it from Stacy and tried it too. That organic sauce is really great. It made my cooking so much better. Ah, I saw your blog. As always, Anthonia, you're good at cooking. Could you make some for me next time? I'd love to try. Well, what do you think? You might have guessed it. The answer is Madeline. She's always asking for things, ending her sentences with, "Can you bring me some?" Quite often. Her introduction when she joined was,
"I aim to live broadly but not deeply. I want to try a wide range of things."
But she's too shallow, never trying anything herself. Especially since I grow vegetables at home, I seem to have become her favorite target. Initially, when we gathered, giving her a box of vegetables once a month was enough to satisfy her. So it wasn't too much of a nuisance. Though I was still not happy about it. But Madeline got a taste for it. Lately, there's been a weekly call for veggies. I could ignore the calls, but since we live close, she insists on coming to collect them the same day. I can't just ignore her when she shows up at my house. And since Madeline faithfully practices her broad but not deep approach, leading the group within our extracurricular activities, she knows a lot of people. If I refused, it was almost certain that she'd spread rumors like,
"That person is so stingy, won't even share a few vegetables."
Afraid of ruining my good standing in the fun group, I ended up giving her the vegetables as she asked. But Madeline's demands knew no bounds. Eventually, she started showing up every 3 days, taking home a large haul of vegetables. Given it's a home garden, there's only so much we can harvest. At this rate, we'd run out of vegetables for ourselves. Unable to bear it any longer, Keely sought advice from Stacy and Antonia.
"If we leave her be, she'll just get worse. We need to stand up to her now."
Exactly. If she starts spreading rumors among the others in the group, we'll explain the situation to them. Encouraged by their words, I confronted Madeline at the next group meeting, with the two of them by my side.
"Madeline, please stop. It's problematic when you take the vegetables I've carefully grown as you please. I can't give you any more vegetables."
As expected, Madeline threatened. "Keely, I never knew you were so stingy." "That's terrible. I'm disappointed. I'll have to make sure everyone in the group knows about this." "Are you okay with that, Keely?" "However,
"Do what you like. But we stand with Keely.
We'll tell everyone exactly what you've done, how many vegetables you've taken from Keely.
That includes how you never paid me back for the groceries I bought for you, despite how many times I've asked.
And I won't forget to mention how you insulted the dish I made for you, after you asked for it." Stacy and Antonia countered, leaving her speechless. In fact, Keely wasn't the only victim of Madeline's behavior. Stacy and Antonia were also troubled by Madeline's actions. Stacy, knowledgeable about shops, was often asked to make purchases with the promise of being paid back. Next time, a promise never kept. Antonia, a skilled cook, had made dishes Madeline wanted to try, only to be told,
"What's this? It tastes awful. How can you eat something like this?"
And she received harsh comments on her blog too. Madeline, now subdued, began to cry. "Keely, I'm sorry. Your vegetables are just so delicious. I couldn't help myself. How can I continue to receive vegetables from you?" She asked, and honestly, being told my vegetables were delicious wasn't the worst feeling. And seeing her so sad, I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for her. "So, I can't give them away for free, but if you pay for them, I'll be happy to share the vegetables," I decided. Hearing this, Madeline brightened up and with a big smile said,
"Thank you."
And she is happy about it. Keely thought, well, if she's learned her lesson and it means my friends get to enjoy tasty vegetables, then it's all good. But Madeline had more tricks up her sleeve. One day, coming back from work and checking the garden, I was shocked. All the vegetables ready for harvest were gone. Staring dumbfounded at my garden, a neighbor approached me. We often exchanged items and were close acquaintances in the neighborhood.
I saw a woman with a pink jacket and short hair harvesting. Look, this person.
Apparently thinking it might be a thief, they took a photo with their smartphone. Privacy concerns aside. What an amazing lady. Well, as you might guess, the person in the photo was unmistakably Madeline. I couldn't believe she'd stooped to stealing. What were those tears about? Furious, Keely immediately called Madeline.
Madeline, after all that talk, you resort to theft when you can't get them for free? Give back the vegetables right now.
I yelled into the phone, overwhelmed by anger, but Madeline responded calmly.
I just happened to pass by and decided to take some vegetables on the way. You said it's fine as long as I pay, right? I've put the money for the vegetables in your mailbox.
Feeling guilty for lashing out if she had indeed left the money, I ended the call to check the mailbox. Inside was a souvenir-like box with money written in large letters on it. Curious, I opened it. I couldn't help but scream. Inside was a mass of donuts, so moldy they seemed like moss-covered rocks. I immediately called Madeline again. Then she said,
"The payment is 1 box of donuts. It was a gift, but it's worth about $30, so it's more than enough for the vegetables, isn't it?"
Mold as payment, what a joke. Then you eat them, I thought, barely containing my anger.
Oh? They were fine when I put them there. Maybe the humidity at your place is bad, and they got moldy quickly? It's not my fault, so it can't be helped.
She replied, and I was so tired of dealing with her that I just hung up, giving up. I couldn't stay silent after being mocked to this extent. I resolved to get back at Madeline, no matter what. Recently, Keely had picked up a new hobby. Prompted by a fellow extracurricular activity member, she started beekeeping. It's a simpler extension of the home garden, but she could actually harvest honey. Keely's natural food lifestyle seemed to be leveling up even more. I shared the story of the vegetable theft with Stacy and Antonia, and we decided to dissolve our group with Madeline. Not that we explicitly ostracized her, we'd still talk if she approached us. But we made sure never to bring up beekeeping near her, knowing it would just tempt her again. However, in such a small world as our extracurricular activities, information somehow leaked, and one day Madeline approached me. "Keely, you're making honey? Don't be shy. Why didn't you tell me?" She said with a smile, so I tried to ignore her with a smile of my own, but, "Could you bring me a jar next time?" Of course, she had to ask. I politely refused. I'm not seriously into beekeeping, and the honey I get is just a small amount. If she took as much as she did with the vegetables, I'd run out in no time. I'm stretched thin just sharing with Stacy and Antonia. And no matter how much I have, I wouldn't want to give any to Madeline. It seems she saw me giving some to the others. "That's so mean to play favorites," she cried, but I ignored her. She left, complaining. A few days later, something was missing from Keely's garden. Knowing the culprit, Keely didn't hesitate to call.
"Madeline, do you know what happened to the large jar from my garden?"
As if she was waiting for it.
"Ah, the big honey jar? I just happened to pass by and took it."
Clearly, Madeline was the culprit. I could almost see her smirking face.
"What? You stole again?"
I gave her exactly what she wanted by reacting. Predictably.
"As long as I pay, it's fine, right? I've put the money in your mailbox,"
she said. Well, I had already checked the mailbox, expecting this. Inside was another money box, which smelled horribly of mold from the outside, so it went straight to the trash without opening. Same old trick, how dull. But, did you know? You see Winnie the Pooh enjoying honey from a big jar, but nowadays, it's rare to store honey in such an obvious jar. So, what kind of jar did Madeline take, you might wonder? Here's how it went down.
Don't open that jar,
I strongly insisted. Eh? Why? Madeline sounded amused by my distress.
Don't open it.
Maybe I'll just open it?
Don't open it.
Maybe I will.
Absolutely do not open it.
I'm going to open it. Ah, she did it. The scream I heard over the phone was far beyond any cry I could muster. Well, to be clear, this jar was a trap. I figured Madeline would definitely come for the honey. And if she found something resembling it, she'd surely take it. That's why I set it up. I bought a cheap jar from the store, painted it with colors using Winnie the Pooh as a model, and even varnished the rim to give it that honey-dripped look. It's been years since I last did a craft project like this. By the way, instead of honey, I wrote funny on the jar. I wonder if she noticed. But, no matter how much it looked the part, Madeline would surely find it odd if the jar was empty inside. So, I made sure to fill it up with plenty. Of course, it wasn't honey. It would be a waste to use the honey I meticulously made just to trap Madeline. So, what did Keely fill it with? Well, since I was giving Madeline the jar to take home, I might as well return something she deserved. What did I put inside, you ask? Out of the surprise jar, not a jack-in-the-box, a mysterious green object appeared. Not just a moss-covered stone, but a donut covered in mold. The honey jar was stuffed full of moldy donuts. Just imagining it is terrifying. Further horrors awaited Madeline. Even if rotten, the donuts were still sweet. With such things in the garden, they wouldn't just sit by silently. What is this, a joke? Madeline was furiously loud for a while before suddenly going quiet. Then, I wondered what happened when a tremendous scream erupted. So what happened?
Ants, ants!
They were swarming. The ants. Actually, this was unexpected. I intended to trouble her with moldy donuts by setting up the jar trap. Right. Leaving a donut jar in the garden would attract ants. It wasn't my intention, but while the jar was waiting for Madeline in the garden, ants were drawn to the donuts. Thus, the ultimate trap was born, moldy donuts with a side of ants. Madeline, caught by the revenge of the moldy donuts and ambushed by ants, seemed to have dropped the jar. Out from the broken jar came many ants and rolling moldy donuts. A scream like that of a cat getting its tail stepped on echoed, and then silence, so I just hung up. Well, the donuts were a modest thank you to the ants for their cooperation. Probably they won't get sick from it. I hope they enjoyed it. Haunted by the jar full of ants, Madeline never came near Keely's garden again. Well, Nancy. What's with that getup? Patricia, the mother of my daughter Betty's classmate, looked me up and down in my work clothes and said that in a mocking tone. This is Betty's mom? Poor people are so miserable, not even getting a day off, said Patricia's husband, Mark, looking down on me with contemptuous eyes. About Betty's mom. What? Did that pauper say something rude?
What? You don't know her? All this time, you should realize that you two are the ones being rude.
When the governor said that in exasperation.
Huh? What do you mean?
Mark replied, seeming not to understand. So the governor said irritably, You know nothing, do you? Nancy is well known in this area, no, in this whole region, for being good at her job. I'm Nancy, 32 years old. I'm a single mother with a daughter who's in 6th grade. When I was 20, I gave birth to a baby girl with my ex-husband Paul, whom I had been dating since high school, and we named her Betty. We were still young, so we started our married life with a lot of support from those around us, but we had no time to enjoy being married and struggled with parenting our first child. Paul, who loved driving, got a job as a truck driver after graduating from high school. At first, he drove short and medium distances, but gradually he was entrusted with long-distance routes that came with allowances. Even though Paul initially helped out a little with housework and childcare, he was never good at that kind of thing to begin with, and when he was tired from work, he stopped helping out at all. Before I knew it, I was always doing everything from housework to childcare all by myself. Neither of us had any emotional leeway, and we started arguing frequently about housework and childcare. We lost the feelings we had for each other when we were dating. All we did was fight in front of Betty, never showing her our smiles as parents. I started to think that Betty wouldn't be happy in a home like that, so I told Paul how I felt, and it turned out he had been thinking the same thing. After many discussions, Paul and I got divorced when Betty was 2 years old. Paul agreed to pay as much child support as he could afford out of his salary, which he has continued to do to this day. After the divorce, I decided to work to make a living, but the first thing I needed to do was find a daycare center where I could leave Betty. Daycare centers vary in terms of hours, fees, and other conditions, and the daycare center you can use also changes depending on your job. After some thought, I decided to find a job first and ask my mom to watch Betty until I could get her into a daycare center. My dad passed away from illness when I was 2, and since then, my mom has raised me as a single mother. When I was 15, my mom remarried a very kind man. He became my stepfather, and as a teenager, I didn't get used to him right away, but he was a warm person who embraced me gently as if I were his own child. He wasn't a very large man, but he worked operating heavy machinery at construction sites. When I was still in high school, I had to deliver something to my dad's workplace at my mom's request, and that was the first time I saw him operating the heavy machinery with both dynamism and delicacy. At that moment, I thought my dad looked so cool and felt proud. I job hunted and started working as a building cleaner, searched for many daycare centers, and somehow managed to get Betty into one that met our needs. Having struggled to find a daycare center, I realized anew just how much mothers with young children agonize over balancing work and childcare. One day, construction began on a vacant lot next to where I was working as a cleaner, and it suddenly reminded me of my dad's job. Strangely, I found myself wanting to try operating heavy machinery too. I noticed my heart dancing with a feeling akin to certainty that I could do it. From then on, other options vanished from my mind, and I headed to my dad's place that very day. When I asked my dad one question after another, my eyes shining, about wanting to become a heavy equipment operator and where to start, he was surprised at first but happily taught me all sorts of things. I also learned that the number of female heavy equipment operators has been increasing lately, which made me even more motivated. First, I got my CDL license, and my dad introduced me to a construction company run by an acquaintance of his, where I was able to get a job as an office worker and heavy equipment operator. Until Betty started elementary school, it was difficult to go to job sites due to the hours of her preschool, so I worked at a materials storage site operating a shovel car to process leftover soil. Meanwhile, I acquired licenses for various types of heavy equipment, and then gradually gained experience by going to job sites. However, after several years with that company, they changed their policy and stopped taking on-site construction jobs. Wanting to improve my skills, I made the bold decision to go independent and become a sole proprietor. As I continued working on-site, I discovered a new world as a heavy equipment operator and found myself stepping into it. Betty joined the marching band at her elementary school. A marching band is a group that plays instruments like trumpets while walking, sometimes parading with dance teams and color guards. Our elementary school has won the state competition in the past and is fairly well known in the community. By the way, the color guard is the part that has the role of colorfully expressing aspects that can't be fully conveyed through just music and marching by waving flags and dancing.
Mom, I want to join the marching band, Betty said.
The marching band? I replied. When Betty said she wanted to join after being invited by a friend, I couldn't afford to buy her an instrument yet. But my job was relatively stable and I thought I could manage the cost of lessons somehow, so I agreed to let her try it for a year for now. More than anything, I felt guilty for making Betty feel lonely because I'm usually working, so I had a strong desire to happily support anything she wanted to do.
Betty, if you're going to do it, put your heart into it,
I told her.
Yeah, I'll do my best,
she replied with a happy smile. Though she joined the marching band after being invited, before long Betty became even more passionate about it than the friend who invited her, and she cheerfully practiced with her bandmates every day. At our elementary school, it's become a tradition for the marching band to do an entrance parade and a performance on the field at the opening ceremony of the sports day every year. About 6 months before the sports day, as the 6th graders graduated and advanced to the next grade, it was time to select a drum major to lead the entire marching band. The drum major is chosen from the oldest 6th graders, so Betty's grade was eligible.
We'll be choosing a new drum major again this year, so everyone think about who you want to select.
The students seem to view the selection of a new drum major as a kind of festival, constantly talking about it before and after the vote, saying things like, "Who are you choosing?"
"It's a secret, we're not supposed to say."
The drum major is essentially the leader, conducting with a baton that has a metal ball on the end and sometimes twirling the baton to perform. The position also requires social skills, leadership, and athleticism. It's a role everyone aspires to. They also have the important responsibility of organizing the members and formation of each instrument section and the stage composition. The subdrum major, who is also a candidate for the next drum major, is chosen from both 5th and 6th graders. Last year, Betty was selected when she became a 5th grader. At our elementary school, the selection method for both drum major and subdrum major involves a vote by all band members, with the final decision made by the advisor's judgment. The student chosen is considered to have the deep trust of the band members and be recognized as having the aptitude for leadership.
Mom, guess what? I was chosen as subdrum major, Betty told me.
Having been honored with the position of subdrum major, Betty earnestly took on the role of supporting the drum major in leading the band members. And so, the vote was held to choose the drum major from among Betty and her fellow 6th graders, but something different from usual happened this year. Dorothy, the daughter of a locally famous company president, suddenly joined as a 6th grader and barged her way into the drum major candidates. Dorothy had joined the marching band in 6th grade with the sole purpose of becoming drum major. Patricia, the president's wife, insisted that Dorothy was qualified to be drum major because she was a 6th grader, forcefully putting Dorothy among the candidates. To the advisor, who was at a loss with how to handle such audacity, "Dorothy has a great personality, she's cute, and she's popular with everyone, so it's practically decided that she'll be chosen, right? Betty is a bit plain, or should I say, has an air of poverty about her, you know?" Patricia reportedly declared Dorothy's victory with full confidence. However, it's said that Dorothy often acted arrogantly towards her classmates, boasting about being the daughter of the president of a major local real estate company. If she didn't like someone, she would use her friends to ostracize them or spread rumors, constantly engaging in misdeeds. It's hard to say that someone like Dorothy is popular. Naturally, Dorothy, not only a newcomer but also someone who behaved that way, didn't gain the trust of those around her and was not chosen as the marching band leader. In the end, Betty was selected as drum major from the 6th grade, and a reliable and popular girl from 5th grade was chosen as subdrum major. A few days later, a meeting was held to report the decision on drum major and explain the marching band's plans for the new year. I was able to attend as my work schedule allowed. Patricia, whose expectations were betrayed, burst into the classroom, ran straight to the advisor without even glancing at those around her.
It's ridiculous that Dorothy wasn't chosen. There must have been some unfair play. Did Betty give everyone something?
And she frantically expressed her opinion. Unable to ignore such offensive remarks, I interjected.
Now, Patricia, isn't that rude to say, no matter what? I didn't raise Betty to do something like that. Oh my, having a poor girl as drum major will ruin the marching band's glory up until now. Shouldn't it be natural for her to decline, knowing her place?
Patricia said something even more insulting. Feeling I absolutely couldn't let this humiliation of Betty stand, I tried to argue back.
That's not true. There was no unfair play. Betty isn't that kind of child, and we held a proper vote that was open for all to see during the ballot counting.
But the advisor clearly stated for me. At that.
So then why wasn't Dorothy chosen? You make the final decision, right, teacher? Why didn't you choose Dorothy?
Patricia barraged the advisor with questions.
Well, of course, the voting results showed that Betty won by a landslide. And Betty has the leadership necessary for a drum major. More than anything, she has the trust of her peers. Plus, Betty is on the taller side, so everyone can see her conducting easily, which makes the band itself look better too.
The advisor regretted saying too much, even if it was the truth, but Patricia turned beet red and shouted.
What did you say? So you're saying Dorothy isn't trusted by others, she's short, and looks bad? Oh, no. That's not what I meant at all. There are many other kids who weren't chosen too. Not being selected doesn't mean they're inferior.
The advisor tried to smooth things over, but Patricia said,
That's enough. We'll continue this discussion another time.
With that, she left in a huff without participating in the meeting. The other parents exchanged glances, some looking displeased, and for a moment the room was in an uproar. But the advisor took control and proceeded with the meeting matter-of-factly, so the roughly 90-minute meeting ended in a calm atmosphere as if the earlier commotion had never happened. However, after that, things that seemed like harassment from someone started happening to Betty and I. First, the baton Betty used for practice went missing, so she couldn't practice. After searching all over, it was found placed in the garbage dump in the backyard. Then rumors spread that Betty had cheated to become drum major. In a horrible case, the marching band practice schedule changed, but only Betty wasn't informed. Various forms of harassment causing real harm occurred. It got so bad that when I consulted the advisor, he said, "This is troubling. There's no evidence, so we can't specify who's responsible. But I'll keep a closer eye out too." During band practice, he apparently told the kids,
"Lately, someone has been bothered by malicious harassment. If anyone has information, please report to the teacher. This is absolutely unacceptable."
I could only hope it would serve as at least a small warning to the perpetrators. And such incidents started happening not only to Betty, but to me as well. As a sole proprietor heavy equipment operator, I take on-site jobs from construction companies and such. But a little after the uproar at that meeting, multiple companies started saying they wanted to cancel their orders with me. Even when I asked the reason for the cancellation, none of the companies would give me a clear answer. I became convinced there must be a mastermind behind this, so I decided to consult my dad, who has many long-standing connections in the industry. When I explained the current situation in detail, my dad's expression changed, realizing it was no trivial matter. He agreed to take action too. Even amidst such unsettling days, Betty, looking forward to conducting the marching band she loved, diligently practiced with the members every day. She also stayed late by herself to practice the drum major's baton performance, a highlight of the marching band. And finally, the day before the sports festival arrived. I had been really looking forward to the marching band parade at the opening ceremony, but as bad luck would have it, there was trouble at the site I was in charge of. I had to go to work from early morning to deal with it. I hoped to make it in time for the 9:30 a.m. opening ceremony, but depending on the site conditions, I might not be able to see Betty's performance in the worst case. "Betty, I'm sorry. I might not make it to the opening ceremony tomorrow," I said, feeling terribly guilty. "It can't be helped, it's for work." "I know you're doing your best for me, Mom." Surely Betty wants me to see her as drum major, yet she says something so grown up like that. "I'm really sorry. But if work finishes early, I might still make it in time." "Yeah." Betty nods, looking a little less cheerful. "I'll call from the company when it's time for you to wake up. I'll make breakfast and your lunch. I feel bad having you go alone, but make sure you lock up properly." I instruct Betty, confirming each point one by one. On the day of, when I got to the work site, the trouble seemed likely to be resolved sooner than I expected, which reassured me. However, even so, I'd be cutting it close to make the opening ceremony. I definitely didn't have time to stop by the house to change. Deciding that making it to the opening ceremony took priority, I rushed to the school straight from the site, still in my work clothes. Somehow I arrived at the school a little before the opening ceremony started, but there was a frantic atmosphere and the teachers seemed on edge for some reason. I quickly found out why. I overheard someone nearby saying that apparently the student in the drum major position still hadn't arrived, and at this rate the marching band's entrance would be delayed. Why? Betty should have gone to school properly. There's no way she still wouldn't be here. I hurriedly tried calling home, but of course no one answered.
What should I do? Something must have happened to Betty.
There's no way Betty would be late on such an important day. My knees trembled and I felt like collapsing on the spot. Just then, someone spoke to me in a crude, tactless, loud voice. "Oh my, Nancy, what's the matter?" In that getup? It was Patricia who said that mockingly, looking me up and down in my work clothes. Standing next to Patricia was her husband Mark, the president of some company.
"This is that Betty's mom? Poor people are so miserable, not even getting a day off,"
Mark said, looking down on me with contemptuous eyes. But now wasn't the time to deal with the likes of them. I didn't even have the energy to feel annoyed. Utterly oblivious to the mood, Patricia gloated triumphantly.
"I wonder what's going on with Betty. For a drum major, how slovenly of her not to show up even this late.
She has no right to conduct.
Isn't it great that Dorothy is here? The teacher should have chosen Dorothy from the start." "Well, once they see Dorothy conduct, everyone will have no choice but to acknowledge her ability," Mark chimed in.
Patricia and Mark spoke as if Dorothy would be serving as drum major.
Huh?
I found out later that on the day before the sports festival, the parents of the 5th grade sub-drum major had contacted the advisor and suddenly said they wanted their child to resign from the position. When asked the reason, they simply said it was because their child no longer wanted to do it, and they wanted to respect the child's feelings. At that very moment, Patricia conveniently visited the teacher and apparently made a point of saying that Dorothy had been practicing for the drum major role and was ready for the actual performance.
It would be a big problem if there was no replacement if Betty came down with a cold on the day of the sports festival, right? I think Dorothy is the perfect fit,
she said, pressuring him to make Dorothy the sub-drum major. With no time to redo the selection process, the teacher had no choice but to appoint Dorothy as sub-drum major, strictly as a stand-in for the drum major. I found it hard to believe that the sub-drum major's resignation, Dorothy's appointment as sub-drum major, and Betty not having arrived yet were all unrelated. Just as I was about to pursue the truth behind this, my cell phone rang. I answered the phone nervously.
Hello, what? I'm at the school right now.
The call was from Betty's homeroom teacher. Apparently, Betty was with the governor and the mayor, and she was looking for me. The teacher seemed relieved to hear I was already at the school. He said he would relay that to the governor for now and contact me again later, then hung up. Why? Betty was with the governor and the mayor? And looking for me? I was at a loss, my mind blank. In any case, it seemed clear that something had happened. A few minutes later, I got another call on my cell phone, this time from the marching band advisor.
I just heard from Betty's homeroom teacher that Betty is on her way to school in the governor's car.
Even more confused by this, all I could manage to say was,
Betty is what? Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for your help.
According to what I heard later, people had apparently commented that it was unusual for Betty, who always arrived early for marching band practice, not to show up for a while this morning. Then, with no word from her, less than 10 minutes before the opening ceremony, Betty still hadn't arrived. The advisor finally thought something was off and called my house, but no one answered. He was looking up my cell phone number to try calling it next when Betty's homeroom teacher phoned to inform him that Betty was with some unexpected people. Those people turned out to be the governor and the mayor. The governor, who had graduated from this elementary school, had managed to make time to come to the sports festival by car with the mayor, whose schedule happened to allow it. On the way, they spotted a girl who looked somewhat familiar crying and running in the opposite direction of the school. They stopped the car and called out to her. When they asked what was going on, the girl said, "My mom is in trouble. I have to go home," and tried to run off again. That girl turned out to be Betty. Why did the governor know Betty's face? Well, I had previously had the opportunity to meet directly with the governor and the mayor, and I had brought Betty with me. Betty had left a bright impression on them. They also remembered that Betty attended the governor's elementary school alma mater. The governor, upon hearing that Betty's mom was in trouble, thought it sounded serious. He first called the school and asked them to get in touch with me, intending to decide the next steps based on the outcome. And that's why the teacher had called me earlier. When the governor learned from Betty's homeroom teacher's return call that I was safe and already at the school, he told Betty,
"Betty, your mom is okay. She's already at the school."
When he asked why she thought her mom was in trouble,
"Lisa told me that my mom is in trouble, so I should go home."
Betty, having calmed down a bit, apparently explained. Then, remembering the sports festival entrance parade, Betty started to panic, saying,
"What should I do? I'm going to be late for the opening ceremony."
The governor let Betty ride along in his car and brought her to the school. So, the advisor, having been informed by Betty's homeroom teacher, told me that Betty was on her way here. I felt so thankful to God. While this was happening, the scheduled start time for the opening ceremony arrived, and the teachers began to bustle about. Then suddenly, a whistle pierced the sky. Next, the sound of drums began to steadily beat out a rhythm.
Now, let's begin the opening ceremony. It's time for the marching band to enter.
The teacher made a cheerful announcement over the microphone, and the marching band entered through the school gate. I saw Betty confidently swinging the conductor's baton.
How?
Patricia and Mark were dumbfounded. Dorothy wasn't at the head of the marching band. She was walking in the back, waving a flag baton with a sulky look on her face. Her movements didn't match the rhythm of the music. It seemed she was just swinging it randomly. Betty, the drum major, had assigned Dorothy the color guard part, but apparently the soul in Dorothy hadn't practiced properly. Perhaps she had been certain she would get to conduct as drum major today, but her expectations were dashed. As the marching band entered the schoolyard, they moved vertically and horizontally across the schoolyard stage while playing their instruments, putting on a performance that visually entertained the audience as well. Well, there was one member disrupting the formation. But still, overall, the marching band's performance was magnificent. Seeing Betty conducting with a proud look, I couldn't help but tear up. I remembered how Betty had diligently practiced despite various interferences. Patricia and Mark had such frustrated looks on their faces, but as the opening ceremony ended, they noticed someone approaching and addressed them in a fawning voice.
Oh, isn't it the governor and the mayor?
Long time no see. Are you here to observe the sports festival today?
Being the president of a major real estate company in this area, he was probably acquainted with the governor and mayor. The governor said, "Ah, yes," giving them a glance.
Actually, my daughter was supposed to conduct the marching band, but a pauper got carried away and it turned into a dull parade.
Then he said with a terribly displeased tone. The governor and mayor ignored Mark and Patricia and called out to me with a smile.
Wow, Betty did a wonderful job conducting.
Yes, she's tall so she looks good, and she skillfully brought everyone together.
Seeing the two of them praising Betty, Mark and Patricia looked more surprised that the governor and mayor knew me than feeling bitter.
Governor, mayor, I'm so sorry that Betty caused you trouble.
What? What happened?
Patricia made a puzzled face.
Yes, someone told Betty the wrong information that I was in trouble, and they found Betty running home and gave her a ride to school.
Patricia's face began to change color.
No, it was no trouble at all. I'm glad she made it in time.
The governor said that, then furrowed his brow.
Still, I just can't get it off my mind, someone telling Betty something like that.
The governor and mayor took issue with the incident of Lisa telling Betty that her mom was in trouble so she should go home. They immediately brought it up with the school, and when the homeroom teacher questioned Lisa, she confessed.
Dorothy told me to say that,
revealing the truth of the matter. Apparently, just as Betty was about to arrive at school, Lisa told her that, causing her to panic and start running home.
So that's what happened. Even if it was done by a child, we can't overlook this,
the governor said, glaring at Mark and Patricia.
No, there must be some mistake. Mark made excuses.
That's right.
Maybe that Lisa girl is lying, Patricia chimed in.
The governor looked at them with disdain as they made excuses, then said,
Anyway. Why yes?
Mark straightened his back and responded.
About Betty's mom, Nancy.
Huh, did that pauper say something rude?
What? You don't know her? If you'd been listening, you should realize that you two are the ones being rude.
When the governor said that in exasperation.
Huh? What do you mean?
Mark replied, seeming not to understand. So the governor said irritably.
That's not the point. Nancy is well known for being good at her job in this area. No, even outside the region.
Yes, She's truly an ally to working women. And her contributions to disaster relief are amazing too. Mark and Patricia turned pale at their words.
No, I still have a long way to go, I said.
It was partly out of modesty, but I really do think I still have a lot to learn, so I felt overwhelmed being praised so much and answered that way. After becoming an independent heavy equipment operator, I took on 2 challenges while gaining on-site experience. One was starting a heavy equipment operator dispatch service so that women like me, with young children and unable to work as we'd like, could take on-site jobs even for short periods. The other was an activity during disasters called heavy equipment volunteering. Lately, I often hear about the 72-hour wall in disasters that once 3 days have passed since a disaster occurs, the survival rate drops drastically and rescue becomes a race against time. Now, small heavy equipment like shovel cars are gaining attention as a powerful ally in this. I learned about the existence of heavy equipment volunteers, who respond to requests and needs from disaster victims gathered at volunteer centers in affected areas to support those areas. As a heavy equipment operator myself, I couldn't sit still, wanting to help somehow, so I decided to participate in heavy equipment volunteering. I also asked professionals who could teach disaster area-specific heavy equipment techniques to hold workshops and such for dispatch members who wanted to go to affected areas like I did. I'm grateful that the things I took on were appreciated by many working women and people in disaster-stricken areas, and were even featured in local media at times. It's still fresh in my memory how I had the honor of having a discussion with the governor and mayor then. The governor added to the pale-faced Mark.
Not just this incident with Betty, you'd better regret your own words and actions.
Hearing those words from the governor, Mark and Patricia trembled. There have apparently been constant bad rumors about Mark's company lately. It seems the buildings and houses constructed by his company had many issues, and among the buildings damaged and collapsed in disasters, a high percentage were built by Mark's company. The state also grew suspicious that there was something behind this data and launched a large-scale investigation. It later came to light that Mark's company was colluding with the construction companies it ordered from, receiving donations and giving them priority orders, and effectively condoning the construction company's shoddy work on earthquake resistance, foundation work, material procurement, and so on. His company is being sued. As for the sudden cancellation of my work, my dad, who has worked at construction companies for many years and is well known in the industry, investigated and found that Mark and Patricia had a grudge over the children and pressured the construction companies through Mark's company not to place orders with my company. Mark's company apparently often demanded donations on the condition of placing orders, and interfered by not allowing companies to participate in bidding if they didn't comply. Companies and sole proprietors harmed by Mark's company, including myself, are coming together to sue for damages. Regarding the harassment of Betty and the pressure on the child who resigned as subdrum major, many witnesses came forward. Even Dorothy couldn't make excuses anymore and could only hang her head, pale-faced. As a result, Dorothy could no longer stay at the school and had no choice but to move to an area where no one knew them. Recently, Betty has been saying that when she grows up, she wants to become a firefighter or police officer.
I want to help lots of people like Mom does, and I want to make sure there are no bad people.
I had always felt guilty for making Betty feel lonely since she was little, but children grow up watching their parents' backs. I realized it was really good that I worked hard wanting to show Betty my hardworking self. Remembering when Betty was small, my goal is to continue the current dispatch business that allows female heavy equipment operators to work even for short periods, so that women with children and women looking for ways to do what they can for others can be even a little more active. Eventually, I want to make it a company with a daycare. And for women who want to participate in small heavy equipment volunteering, I'm thinking of providing more and more places for education to improve their skills. From now on, for Betty's sake too, I want to keep moving forward true to my beliefs and shining bright.